Agendas for study sessions, including concept reviews, can be found by visiting Broomfield's website at broomfield.org. Our agenda this evening includes 2 study session items. Seeing there are no action items or concept reviews on the agenda this evening, there will not be any public comment. The study session will be televised on Channel 8 and through live streaming on Broomfield's website. Our first study session item this evening is an update on Broomfield development. Council members have a copy of the agenda memorandum, which I'll ask our staff to summarize.
Thank you, Mayor, and good evening, community and council. Anna Bertanzetti, who produced an outstanding memo, by the way, is going to kick us off this evening. We did receive questions from some council members and also from the community on both items. Those questions will be addressed during the presentation. Ms. Bertanzetti.
Thank you. And thank you, Mayor Pro Tem, City Council. For that reason, my presentation is going to be a little bit longer than usual. We've got a lot to go through, and then I do want to try and address as many of those questions as I can as part of the presentation. We could have the next slide, please. So in March of 2022, at the City Council's focus session, there were some discussions regarding Broomfield's current financial status, current and future areas of focus, and the steps to build a decision-making structure to ensure that Broomfield is able to meet financial and service obligations moving forward. So we're bringing forward this, as well as multiple other study sessions and business items for discussion and action by the City Council, building both on the focus session as well as the previous 18 months as we've worked on improvements to economic vitality, the long-range financial plan, and the development process improvements. Next slide, please. So we're starting tonight with an overview of our current development, and then I'll move into some of our future development obligations, and from there talk a little bit about residential growth. So as we've seen, Broomfield has experienced a significant amount of residential population growth over the last 10 years. Quick snapshot of how we stand in the metro area at 32.6% over the last 10 years compared to the other cities. In addition to this change in the residential population, Broomfield is also seeing a change in the type of housing that's being developed. This includes increasing percentages of multifamily units. And when I use the term multifamily this evening, I'm going to be talking about townhomes, duplexes, apartments, as well as condominiums. The percentage of multifamily housing has increased from around 21% in 2000 to approximately 42% of Broomfield's housing stock in 2020. Next slide, please. This graph is showing the permits issued from 2006 forward, broken down by multifamily versus single family permits. It's a good visualization of how that current, previous, and future growth is happening quite heavily in the multifamily units and less so moving forward in the single family. As identified in the staff memo, staff currently has around 5,996 residential units in what we're calling the development pipeline. These include residential projects that are anticipated to occur in 2022, 23, and 24, with some continuing even into future years. Of those 5,996 units that we're considering in the pipeline, a total of 602 units will be restricted affordable units at a minimum. Of the 602 units, a minimum of 88 of those housing units will be for sale. The developments in baseline, which represent about 947 of the units of that total 5,996, will result in an additional 110 required affordable units within that development. So those 110 are not reflected in that total number as they're not specifically within individual projects, but they are required by the managed growth development agreement in place for baseline. Of the 5,996 units identified in the pipeline, about 29% are projected to be for sale, with the remaining it ends up 4,247, which is 71%, being for rent. A question was also raised regarding the supply chain issues and whether we're seeing any impact to anticipated projects coming forward in 2022. At this point in time, we haven't had a project that's completely been put on hold due to those supply chain issues, cost increases, or labor shortages. That could change in the future. But we are hearing about some delays in starting vertical construction or site construction due to the supply chain delays. Next slide, please. Brimfield is anticipated to continue to outperform and outpace many other metro areas in terms of our development, both commercial and residential. And I go into more detail about commercial development in the staff memorandum as well, it should be noted. Future development proposals, whether commercial or residential, are guided by Brimfield's existing and previously approved plans. It is also critical to keep in mind that Brimfield has existing agreements with many landowners that impact future decisions. An overview of some of those agreements, development agreement, managed growth agreements, annexation agreements are included in staff's memorandum. For the purposes of today's study session, we focused on 3 key areas in considering future development. The first was conversion of commercial to residential land use, also perimeter area developments, and then redevelopment and infill. So approaching that first of the 3, the commercial to residential conversion of land use that is detailed in the staff memorandum. Each development project that comes forward, we do discuss and identify if there is an impact to Brimfield's long-range financial plan. Commercial land use designations generate revenue, while residential projects do not. Converting commercial to residential land use does have an impact, a negative impact, on Brimfield's long-range financial plan. The second key area of focus is development in perimeter areas, which creates the need to extend services to those perimeter areas of Brimfield. This can be a significant investment in terms of water, sanitary sewer infrastructure, and roadway extensions. The staff memorandum provided a few examples, such as the infrastructure requirements to support development east of I-25. And for this reason, and because the development east of I-25 would also drive the need for other city services, the timing of infrastructure to allow for development to occur in those perimeter areas needs to be carefully considered as we move into the future. The third key area of focus is redevelopment in infill areas. These pose unique challenges as development occurs in close proximity to existing residential areas and businesses. Growth in these areas can still drive the need for increased infrastructure costs, and construction can lead to impacts on our existing residents and businesses. Redevelopment can also be proposed at higher densities that have been there in the past, or new uses could be proposed, and these could change the character for Brimfield's existing neighborhoods. Regardless of whether growth is occurring in perimeter areas or as an infill, the growth of population will drive additional capital infrastructure needs. Our question was asked regarding how the anticipated residential growth will impact the need for wastewater capacity for Brimfield. Based on current estimates, Brimfield will need to initiate engineering and financial planning for the expansion of the wastewater treatment facility around 2025. When Brimfield reaches a population of 99,397 people, Brimfield will need to either commence the construction of that wastewater treatment facility expansion or would need to hold additional building permits. And so those thresholds are established and are based on population. It was also asked whether there were concerns with attracting funding for future bus rapid transit funds and interchange improvements at Colorado 7 and I-25 if residential development were not to continue along Colorado 7. At this time, the developments occurring are not at an optimal level to support bus rapid transit. Density can either occur in terms of jobs and employment or in terms of units within the area. We consider optimal support as a density of 30 to 50 per acre, so that's jobs, employment, or unit. While supporting levels would be minimum supporting levels would be in the 12 to 16 per acre. The current constructed residential development densities and commercial densities along this corridor are largely less than the minimum. We're starting to see some apartment projects, both constructed and moving in, into a proposal that are on the cusp of being a target density, but still not anywhere close to that optimal density. To achieve the higher density employment or residential development, there would be changes that would need to occur in coordination with landowners because there would need to be adjustments made to the maximum heights, maximum densities, setbacks, minimum open areas, lot coverage, and many other development standards in that area in order to achieve those higher densities. We believe it's better to encourage the bus rapid transit supported densities in a target level or optimal, rather than continuing to encourage lower density developments if seeking bus rapid transit supported development remains a priority. Excuse me. I told you it was a long presentation. In the memorandum, we also bring up the future development design guidelines that may be considered by City Council. Broomfield does not have many design guidelines on a community-wide scale and require or specific requirements in place across the city. Establishing design guidelines can help to provide clear guidance and clear expectations to the development community. It is also important to recognize that although design guidelines are an important tool to use in helping to establish design requirements, and so we're talking building aesthetics, landscaping, parking lot layout design, site layout, or other design considerations, the design guidelines are not the place that we would consider things like changes to setbacks, changes to density, changes to uses, building heights, setbacks, minimum or maximum parking standards, or other similar development standards that are in the municipal code or within planned unit developments. As with any update, whether that's to the code to address development standards or with the design guidelines, staff would need to encourage a public engagement process for each of those steps. There would also be engagement with City Council as well as advisory boards as appropriate. So building on this, recommendations, which may be a result of changes to requirements to address, for example, the ACE's recommendations on greenhouse gas reduction, would likely be incorporated into municipal code amendments or amendments to strengthen the building code rather than design guidelines. Updating the code would be through a different process than those design guidelines, be very similar to what we just accomplished with the reverse setbacks from oil and gas. During the study session in May, I'll present more information and options to go into detail about how Broomfield has various tools available to utilize that can be modified to help shape future residential development. Next slide, please. The last portion of staff's memorandum and my presentation this evening is regarding Broomfield's residential management ordinance. This ordinance was first put into place in 1998. This ordinance limits the number of permits Broomfield can issue in any given year, and it allows exemptions for some projects from this limitation. It also allows City Council to consider exemptions for multifamily projects on a case-by-case basis, and allows for reallocation and rollover of units from one year to the next. From 1998 to around 2005, City Council reviewed building permit numbers annually and took specific action to roll over and reallocate permits from non-exempt projects from the current year and into future years. Starting around 2006, this annual action and review was not occurring, it ceased. The timing also generally overlaps with a period of the Great Recession. And during this time, most projects proceeding were exempt from the process entirely. So this was when Broadlands, Redleaf, Wildgrass, and Anthem were all at their peak of development. Next slide, please. This chart shows the residential units by year, excluding the units that were exempted from building permit requirements. The red line represents 300 units per year. Although action was not taken by City Council, if we were to assume a rollover of units unused from one year to the next through this time period, Broomfield anticipates using all 300 units in 2022 that were allocated for 2022, as well as all remaining units not utilized since 2006. So beginning at the end of 2022, staff will begin again forwarding building permit allocation requests for City Council's consideration for the following year. City Council can also consider updates to the growth management requirements. For example, the existing ordinance does not provide guidance to the developers or to the City Council about how or why a multifamily development should be exempted from the building permit allocation. Considerations could be added to incentivize affordability, mixed use, achieving desired environmental sustainability recommendations, or addressing other key priorities City Council may identify. Next slide, please. This study session provided a lot of information, which hopefully will be helpful as we move forward through the next few months and the next few study sessions and business meetings as we continue the discussion in consideration of some potential action items to help shape the future of growth within Broomfield. Staff prepared this general outline of key topics and upcoming meetings, and we welcome City Council's feedback and direction regarding the items raised in tonight's study session, as well as the plan for the future meetings. And with that, I conclude staff's presentation.
Thank you very much, Ms. Burton-Zetty. Does any member of council have any questions or comments? Come on. Don't be shy. All right, Councilmember Ward.
Thank you, Mayor. I get to play double duty today. I guess my first question for staff is going to be, and you'll have to forgive me if I didn't hear that in your presentation. What is the current timeline for the update on the municipal codes?
So thank you for the opportunity to answer that, Councilmember Ward. So a few months ago, there was the discussion regarding whether we would bring forward the update for the parking minimums and maximums that would. So that does not have a schedule. The priority has been on the design guidelines and bringing that forward. Certainly, at the direction of City Council, we can reprioritize, but at this time, the priority has been bringing forward the design guidelines. And the reason was that that was addressing the economic vitality goal to try and create a framework from which the development community could work. But as we talk this evening, as we move forward in the next study sessions, we can shift those priorities at council's direction.
Okay, thank you. Where exactly, like how far along are we in that process with the design guidelines, and what is the anticipated completion date, I guess that's the way to put it?
It's a pretty large process to establish community-wide design guidelines. So we are in the process of selecting a consultant and would need to work with that consultant to establish the engagement process as well as the deliverables through the process. We believe it's a 12 to 15 month process. We have an outline and a pretty rigid framework that we believe will help to ensure that we can get that accomplished by early next year.
Okay, thank you. And then going back to the codes, if City Council were to reprioritize that, what would that timeline look like? And how many more projects would we have approved under the previous guidelines that would not be affected by the updated code?
I think the reverse setback is a good example to work from, where we brought that forward with an initial study session and then ended up needing to break that ordinance up in two parts. So I hesitate to give a particular time frame just because I'm not sure where the council's direction could go. And if it is similar to that, where we might need to bring forward multiple projects, it may be a multiple month or even more than a year process to bring forward multiple amendments, just depending on the direction of council. But pending that direction, we can certainly work on a time frame.
All right, perfect. Thank you. No further questions at this time.
Councilmember Ward, Mayor, if I may. So the lift, it is not as simple as any one of us would like it to be. So you're not looking at a code book that was updated 3 years ago, or 6 years ago, or 10 years ago, or 15 years ago. So again, the conversations that we continue to have with this staff and this council is the methodical and intentional, what is most important for us to do right now. Not the biggest bang for the buck, right? That's not where we are. And so again, it's not really reprioritizing, it's reallocating the existing staff and resources to update a document that is in some cases over 15 years old. So it's almost like a rabbit hole, Councilmember Ward. And the council has individual and collective hotspots, if you will, that they want to focus on. We have to zero in on not the cool pieces, but the kind of the non-sexy backbone pieces that get us where we need to be. So It needs to be a multi-pronged decision-making process, right? So it is what is going to impact us the most tangibly, that's a repeatable process that our developers can rely on, that this council can become accustomed to, and then we can build staff around at least for the next 36 months of what that looks like. So it's a highly complex endeavor.
Yes, thank you for that.
Thank you, Councilmember Henkel.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm actually physically exhausted because we moved in a lot of families yesterday into the academy place. It's been really good to see, that kind of project here in Bloomfield. So I'm super excited about that. Anyway, so as I talk today, I just like when we go to those design guidelines, I just have some input about that because I think it's so early right now to even get into the weeds on that. But I do want to just really encourage us, kind of like what you said, Ms. Hoffman, about just letting like the fact kind of rise as to like what's really necessary, what's really important, and not to get into the weeds on those design guidelines. It would be interesting to see, just what sort of filter that we're looking at it with that. The last, I guess this is sort of a question I've been asking, I think, for over 2 years. Our revenues to expenditures ratio, I've always had a problem with that. And mainly because conceptually, it seems like, yes, if we give this land to commercial, we're going to be making money off of that land. However, we are finding that people are also have a monetary type value. So like if we're building places that are not around commerce, I could see that. But if in places like when we talk about like the mall, that's going to be very important actually to have more people there because then we have more commerce. And the way that COVID kind of really affected everything, I think we're really seeing a lot of different, aspects and just the way that our commerce has changed. So are there ways, my question is just that, are there ways that residential buildings and employment creates revenues? And are we willing to look at that piece of it and see, on each project, like maybe this does bring out some revenue, and how are we looking at it differently, especially after COVID?
Thank you for the question, Councilmember Henkel. I think unfortunately, it's just not as black and white. Residential is not necessarily bad and commercial good. There is support there of the commercial of our employment areas when we have the residential. And I think in our staff memorandums, we've started doing more than just identifying that there's a revenues to expenditure change. Well, we've also added an economic vitality section, and those sections sometimes discuss the fact that for using the mall as an example, the residential helps to support the 24-hour activity. It's not 24-hour, but I think it was 18-hour activity at the mall, and enlivening the space and providing the necessary support to help move the mall into the future. So we are trying to help provide some of that evidence. We've also done an update to the long-range financial plan, which provides or accounts for some additional revenue being provided by residential. It's just not enough to fully compensate for the fact that it costs a lot to support residential development, but it is accounted for more than it had been in the past in terms of residential when we evaluate.
Okay, yeah, I'm just a math person, so every time I see that number, I'm like, I feel like it's just landing on sort of quantitative value. So it rubs me the wrong way in that regard. But I understand the economic vitality and that we've added words to that. But I would love to put a number to that as well. Thanks.
Councilmember Hinkle, if I may, we have put a number to it. We've never attributed any residential to the sales tax portion. Again, that's so part and parcel of what we've been doing over the last 18 months that allows us to arrive at some of the recommendations that we're moving now, attributing a portion of how those residents contribute to the overall so that it's not a stagnant number. So again, when we look at, we have a conversion rate Council has seen it ad nauseum. What we haven't done is to do a cumulative effect, same thing that we talked about at our council retreat, right? We have to be able to say the culmination of all of these decisions brings us here for this decision. So it's, again, the multifaceted. So even though now we do 25% that we attribute to the overall economic viability that these residents bring. Even with that, the numbers that council saw and that the community saw when we did the fiscal analysis, it doesn't close that gap. So what we know is per rooftop, we're looking at about 24 to 27. And again, what we're about to talk about with some of the council questions, we're looking at a 40% almost across the board increase. Had our CIP meeting today, ongoing budget conversations today. So the costs are rising exponentially. So all of those factors that we didn't necessarily have to take into account before, even with the attaching a dollar value to those residents, when we're looking at the 24 to 2,700 for current service level, not what it's going to cost us. Next week is the budget amendment. The first one, we've talked about those items already. The second budget amendment will be significant because of the rising costs, which means the decision-making that this staff needs to bring to council and the community every single meeting is that totality of circumstances. So when we know that the gap continues to increase for the services that we provide versus what it's costing us to provide. So it's not enough for us in the memos to say, here's what the conversion rate is. It's not enough for us to say, here's the attributing factor for each one of these residents in our communities. We have to look at what it costs in order for us to continue on this path from a residential perspective. And that has everything to do with the service levels, right? And I don't mean right as in, I'm looking for validation. I say right as in, that is what the facts are. Part of the issue, and exactly to your point, Councilmember Hinkle, our long-range financial plan is updated every 5 years. It's like balancing your checkbook every 5 years. So we are getting to the place of having an integrated, fluid model that allows us to be able to take those numbers, what it costs residentially, expenditures, revenue, and have a dynamic modeling that then when we come to council, we can say, here's what the overall impact is to the long-range financial plan. Here's why it's important. Those are the tough decisions that you all will be making in the next 3 years. And it kind of gets back to what we were talking about before, Councilmember Ward, which is we are in the reallocation phase, which means what isn't going to happen that we have agreed to making it happen. So we're to the place where we're finally, again, over the last 12 months, figuring out what we have to pay for. What have we agreed as a community over the last 15 years? What have we agreed to? And we need to look at those funds first. And then the second budget, the bucket, is we're looking at in the pipeline already, right? So we're not even talking any new residential. If we had no other residential, just what we have right now, we are looking at an exponentially huge impact to current infrastructure. So it's less about development by development, and it's more about we have got to shore up what we have right now.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Hoffman. Yeah, some of this stuff has been really surprising to me. I did not know that we had, a certain limit. So that was very interesting. Are we going to find out any more gems in our code?
Yes, yes, you are. And you're going to find some gems in business development agreements. You're going to find some gems in various triggers. One of the parts that Ms. Bertanzetti had alluded to was the statutory requirement about the capacity for our wastewater. I think all of us kind of sat around the room when our wastewater person said, so at a certain capacity percentage, we're in design mode by law. And so it's not a choice, right? We have, and then by another certain percentage, which has to be part of the decision, the deliberative decision-making process that all of us need to begin to go through. Every single one of these decisions that we're going to be making is making it with full intention of what that impact looks like, short-term and long-term. Had a meeting, again, as I said, on the CIP this afternoon, rather, safety issues. From a CIP perspective, and what was budgeted 5 years ago was pushed and pushed and pushed, and now it's into a different category. It's not a should we do it, it's a we have to do it. And not only do we have to do it, but it's 3 times higher than what we had ever planned. So there's plenty of more nuggets. I wish I could say we're even to the 50% mark, but it's daily. It's daily that we are communicating with each other and finding the structure to have a central repository for each one of these items, because we have to have that. We have to have the structure in place not only to be repeatable, but for you all to be making well-informed, intentional decisions.
Thank you, and thank you for your presentation, Ms. Zani. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Marshall-Shin.
Thank you, Mayor. I have a lot of information. I want to go back to Councilmember Ward's question for a minute. I understand that the code overhaul and update is a huge task to undertake. But my understanding is on design guidelines, that's intended to not only give a framework for what we want as a community, but also give the developers all a framework to work with, so it's easier for them to come to, from the design stage to the actual building stage. Is that correct? Streamline the process?
In order to answer that question, in order to streamline the process to allow for a more expedited review, we believe that both municipal code and the design guidelines would need to be updated or established in the case of design guidelines, because it really does, as you say, create the framework and then work together hand in hand. The development standards providing the framework for heights and densities and uses, and then the design guidelines establishing preferences of the community in terms of aesthetics as well as design, and really shaping other aspects that really aren't a specific development standard. So they work together quite a bit.
So I guess was my question, the parking minimums, things like we've heard of, that we do on a case-by-case basis right now, like solar or EV charging or bike parking. Later comes our second study session agenda on, greenhouse gas emissions, moving possibly to electrification. Is it possible to set aside the rest of the code and just focus on the update of that portion of it right now? Or is it too complex to do it all? They have to do it all at once, I guess.
So your city manager would probably have a different answer than our key staff. So Ms. Bertanzetti.
Why is that so?
My answer would be yes, absolutely, because it makes sense, right? From a common sense perspective, without knowing all of the other stuff.
So we have started, and this is actually getting back to Councilmember Ward's question, what have we done so far? One thing I neglected to say is in 2019, Council authorized an assessment of Broomfield's zoning and land use plans, just to try and give generally an overview of where the problems are, where improvements could be made. So we have that step completed, and it outlined a lot of areas for improvement. So in terms of our current staffing levels, needing to meet resident expectations for service, as well as the development community's expectations for development review, we really feel like we could do the development guidelines or some updates to the code, but not a potential update to both of them, even with a consultant's help at the same time. And really a full rewrite of the code, really comprehensive, top to bottom, would require a consultant's assistance based on our staffing levels. So that would be an additional budgetary need.
Councilmember Marshall, I'm going to take some liberties and have a clarifying question to Ms. Bertzetti on these same lines. If council was to pick the top 5 things that were most crucial,
We can get that done.
the question would be, could we arrive at 5 things?
I
And
think
how
we
long-
can.
How long would that, so again, from a recommendation perspective, right? And so there's another clarifying question. If we were to say, so 2 pieces, Ms. Bertzetti. The first one being, and I always get a bunch of text messages and emails after kind of this free form, but I think it gets right to your, I mean, you and I've had this conversation, so I know where you're going with it. So if we said, based on, if there was a matrix that based on X number of square footage, what would the, instead of the number of EV charging stations, saying that it needs to have conduit, right? Again, you can't price the developers out. And right now, again, we haven't even seen the capping. Not even talking about our small businesses. But the large businesses, it is that pass through to the community. So we have to take an approach that isn't a matrix specific, right? They have to be able to, and this is why it gets messy. Because if sustainability is most important for 3 council members, but affordable housing is most important for 3 council members, and then based on the overall piece, what does that package look like? If we could set up a structure for you all to have that conversation where we could actually end somewhere, then that would influence what the design guidelines are without a consultant. And it would influence or drive to a certain degree what the code updates could be. Does that make sense?
It does, thank you. That's all the question I have right now.
All right, thank you. Councilmember Cohen.
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to follow up maybe to Councilmember Henkel's attempt at real numbers. I'm curious, because this had come up before when we had commercial developments where there was a residential buffer added. And the question, so therefore that we were missing out on a certain amount of revenue. Looking at, since we have 20% left to build out in the community, we already know we have 6,000 homes already approved, correct? And I think there's several thousand more in pipeline. And using your formula for what's affordable, what will pay the cost of the residential, how much of that remaining 20% really needs to be commercial?
That's a really detailed question. I'm not sure I'm prepared to answer tonight, Councilmember Cohen. But it is definitely something, especially as we look east of I-25, looking at updates to the sub-area plans. We've identified that previously in the economic vitality updates, that in addition to design guidelines, we need to start looking at sub-area plans. As Manager Hoffman mentioned, these plans are 20 to 30 years old. Priorities have changed, development market has changed. So you're right, some of that is looking at the land use that is designated on our available properties and ensuring that they create a financially stable base moving forward. The next update to the comprehensive land use map and the comprehensive plan won't be until 2025, but sub-area plans could be updated at some point before then, to help guide that future development. But I'm not prepared to answer it tonight, but that would be something that we certainly need to look at as we look at future land uses in our vacant areas.
It sounds like there could be, just speculative, the entire area east of I-25 may need to be commercial. In terms of the 6,000 to 8,000 homes we already know that are going to be on the other side. And with, and, you know, a business, there are some business things in the pipeline, but it's obviously very speculative as to how that will turn out. Correct.
Right, and we would need to look at the available land. We have quite a bit of land actually east of I-25. So there's probably some opportunities. There's already approvals for zoning for some mixed use there. So there are some residential approvals north of 160th Avenue zoning. So
I guess my question is there enough land presently zoned as commercial
it's
to
a
meet this
very
future?
good question. Sorry, I don't have the answer to that.
So Councilmember Cohen, we're, I want to temper the thought that developing east of I-25 is the answer. I don't foresee developing east of I-25 because there's no infrastructure.
No, I'm just, they're using that as figuratively.
Yeah.
We know
Okay,
that's,
good.
we know
I just
that's,
wanted to.
we
I
know
just
that's
get- I just
undeveloped
wanna-
land, but I'm just saying, if you look at the whole, that we have 6,000 to 8,000 homes.
Yeah,
What amount of commercial do we need to support 6,000 to 8,000 more homes? And where is it? And is it already currently in the zoning that there's enough commercial zoned property, or do we need to rezone? Or look ahead that, you know, maybe east of I-25 needs to be a corporate park or something. We really truly want to balance the revenue.
so having the, yes, and you should join some of our meetings because that's exactly what we're going to be able to do within 3 to 4 months is have a GIS map that indicates what's zoned, what's open, what's redevelopable, infill, everybody's favorite topic. What would be east of I-25 will not come for the next decade, and it won't be in time for us to even contemplate staying financially resilient with the decisions that have already been made. So it's a multi-pronged approach. So having more commercial isn't the answer. Putting many more filters on any residential is not the answer. Watching costs exponentially, looking at, we're bringing the water rate study to you all in July, along with the debt conversations. So again, each one of these conversations play in with each other, and there isn't one, there's not one path. We need to do a multitude of things right now. Understanding what can and can't be developed. So even if it's zoned commercial, we've had so many residences go up around that commercial. It's a very different conversation with those current residents about what kind of commercial. What is the setback? Again, it's much more complicated because we only have the 20% left. So again, it's this council making a decision certainly by the fourth quarter of 2022, what the next 3 years looks like. And it's a combination of all those things that you just mentioned.
Yeah, it sounds like we need a formula by that timeframe that says this percentage of this, or, you know, or we don't have, we slow the housing development.
And we slow the housing development. Got to do both.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Councilmember Shad.
Thank you, Mayor. You know, it seems like at this point we have a lot of different documents, a lot of different studies that we're dealing with. A long-range financial plan, comp plan, municipal code, the charter, PUD, development agreements, and the list continues to go on and on. All of this, you know, kind of the structure that we have, all of this we're dealing with in a very rapid moving state. You know, major changes, not just our physical environment, but our social environments as well as increasing pressures that we have going on at this time. We have invoices coming due for past projects, past agreements that we've had. And so the one thing that I wanted to hone in on was this residential growth management ordinance that we have. And this
Who knew, Councilmember Schaaf?
right, well, the mayor kind of sent me down this rabbit hole today, so I spent way too long researching this. You know, I'm trying to understand this one piece, since this is a big part of this memo. Boulder had a growth cap back in the 90s, and this spurred a lot of the bedroom communities to the east, including Broomfield, in which we started to see rapid growth in these communities. So one of the things that somebody from the Home Builders Association said was communities cannot be permitted to turn their backs on hardworking families by growing jobs while exporting their housing burden to their neighbors, which is basically what Boulder did. And so a lot of communities started to have residential growth while Boulder continued to have commercial growth. I found it interesting that in 2005, the comp plan talked about residential growth management ordinance, but in 2016, there's no mention of that ordinance. So I'm curious, with this ordinance on the books, in the future years or even later this year, could we deny a project based upon, or I guess not deny a project, but deny building permits based upon that ordinance, since it hasn't been enforced basically since the early 2000s?
So I'm gonna add Anna, I feel compelled to answer, but I'll fill in after Anna answers. We talked about that, Councilmember Schaaf. So Anna, how best do we utilize that ordinance to our benefit?
So the ordinance has been in place for many years. We haven't been enforcing it the last few years in terms of the allocation. Council has continued to approve some exemptions for multifamily. We have continued to have development agreements, which are also exempted. So our plan is to bring forward at the end of this year a summary, a review of where we are with permits, and potentially look, well, not potentially, but have to look at the allocations for the following years. We will start with reaching out to our developers to ask their permitting numbers. We do every year anyway, to have a good estimate of the construction that we expect to see in the following year. And we'll need to take a careful look at how those permits are allocated. But that is the ordinance that's in place, and council has that authority to allocate permits to the building community. We'll start with the agreements that are in place, any allocations in existing PUD plans or site development plans, and the exemptions that are in place. And we'll have to bring that forward when we have more of an opportunity to really look at the numbers closer to the end of the year.
Councilmember Schaaf, and there's a response in an email to council under attorney-client privilege to the answer of your question. We haven't been enforcing. Can we start again? For the public, the answer is yes, and the legal analysis is in that email.
So I'm curious, based upon, what we had seen in Boulder, we continue to want to enhance our commercial development. So I guess the other question is, should we keep this ordinance in our code, or should we do away with it? And I'm curious, what's the economic impact of limiting residential growth in our future?
I don't think anybody has a crystal ball to say that, to answer what that looks like. And it depends on who you ask. So if you're asking about affordable housing and workforce housing, you're going to get a different answer, that we need to continue to provide that opportunity. If you ask city management that looks at these CIP and these books and the dollar amounts, it's a much cleaner answer. So again, it depends on council's direction to set that stage of, we are committed to providing a robust package of information that include costs for the first time. Well, not the first time you all have seen it, but I mean, like in Broomfield's history, there's generally not dollar amounts attached to items. It's just, we kind of figure it out. We figure it out as we go. Those are the conversations that council and this team have been having, is we can no longer afford to do that. Our opportunity for risk, and this was before unknowns, right? Nobody had a silver bullet of information regarding any of those general things that are outside of our control. State unfunded mandates, federal unfunded mandates. We could rely on a much higher level to make decisions based on risk. We had a higher tolerance for risk in Broomfield. Things were sweet, it was juicy. Everybody wanted to come. Sprinkle that with 2 years of COVID, 10 million under, can't recover. From the perspective of everything being exponentially more expensive, and now 8 to 12% inflation with no end in sight. The risk, it behooves us to have immediately a smaller area, a much lower risk. We should not be as inclined as we were before to be taking risks, because there's too many unknowns. So it's less about, and here I'm going to get a bunch of, here comes the emails and the text messages. It's more about what we can afford to do versus what council and the community considers to be the right thing to do. We've got to focus on our infrastructure. We've got to focus on those commitments that we've already made, and we have to do it within a 40% increase. 6-month delayed pipelines. So again, there's no easy answers, and it's for the next 36 months, but the decisions that you all make in the next 36 months will determine the long-term health and viability. You all are in a pivotal moment.
Thanks. So I mean, I guess this is maybe not the current situation, but the future situation with growing residential developments. There is a utilities need, especially water and sewer, as you talked about the infrastructure. Are we seeing the same concern for our water sewer enterprise? You know, kind of in terms of the concerns there are to the rapid pace of residential development, and how are we positioning Broomfield to fulfill those current commitments as well as future developments in terms of that sewer and water enterprise?
That's probably the most poignant and important question that we will field all night long, is that one. That gets back to the infrastructure, the backbone of where we are. And so all of these, the residential is what's triggering. The residential is what's triggering the pump stations that we need to now immediately shift to focusing on. It immediately is driving what the capacity is for our wastewater. There's a decision that was made in 2009 that rather than doing the Broomfield Reservoir, we would repurpose Sienna Reservoir. And part of that repurposing created design needs and guidelines. It's one thing to get the water, it's another thing to get it where we need it to be. So again, the repurposing, and it sounded at that time, you know, this is going to be quicker, it's going to be less expensive. But when it doesn't happen, then other needs and priorities take place. So you all are in a very unenviable position that all of these things, Councilmember Schaaf, are coming right now. So we're looking, again, the whole afternoon was spent on just that. On the water infrastructure, on the enterprise funds in general. What do we have? What does it look like? How do we adapt financially? That what we should have been adapting a while ago, but nobody knew about COVID. Nobody knew about the exponential costs, and nobody knew that our population would skyrocket. So the structure wasn't in place to be able to say, here's what all of the, again, that cumulative effect of all of those things, right? And that's why it gets back to the risk, right? That we continue to assume a really high level of risk. And now it's time to pay the piper. So the development, particularly the residential, absolutely influences and drives what that infrastructure needs to look like, should look like. In many cases, should have already been in the pipeline. So we can't enter into contracts unless we have the money to pay the full amount. And so now part of the decision-making process is, given what we know that everything is so exponentially expensive right now. Katie Allen is a great teacher in these things because she's able to speak the language regarding, is now the time to do it because it's just so expensive. We have 4 projects, but it doesn't matter how expensive it is right now because the development has driven the demand for us to do those 3 really exponentially $10 million plus projects.
I think that's definitely where we are. I mean, you mentioned the crystal ball, in terms of looking at this and saying, we don't have the crystal ball, what the future, but we can look back at those 90s and see, what the growth cap in Boulder did. And we're seeing that same, I guess, landscape play out here in Broomfield in Boulder. The decrease in residential, increase in commercial, and the strain that put on the community. And the thing that we're seeing is the congested roads and things like that as more people are coming into to be employees. And we see that already, right? We have an 80% that leave, almost 90% that leave Broomfield to work somewhere else. And that same percentage comes back into Broomfield to work. And so, as communities continue to develop around us, especially to the east and the north, we're going to start seeing congested roads. We're going to start seeing that infrastructure needing to be updated, maintained quicker, and potentially designed, investment in that design and necessity to handle that growth that's not necessarily within our boundaries. And so you're exactly right. There's a whole lot of challenges that are ahead of us. And I think that we're definitely in a position where we need to take a careful look at this and be wise about the decisions that we have. So thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Lynn.
You mentioned a water pipeline from Sienna Reservoir. So I had a specific question on that. It seems that is not adhering to the originally scheduled timetable that could you, and Kate, I don't know if they're correct, staff members are here to give any details on that, but maybe you know.
Katie, is there? Thank goodness, because I got about the overall 60%, Councilmember Lee, so.
Katie Allen, Sitting County Engineer. Thank you, Councilmember Lim.
Which part of, I'm sorry, I don't have the original schedule details we've shared with you. We've been working on it throughout this time and we've been advancing the project.
On the original schedule, I think we should have been digging the pipeline and through, across from the reservoir, through the back end of Wildgrass open space and things like that by now. And that's
We are
what my
delayed.
community is asking, okay?
Okay, then we are delayed. Our design is wrapping up and we're starting a Broomfield Voice page for the public process. We are gonna have to go through a site development plan amendment. And we will be working with our finance department in finding more funds, as Jennifer said, or City Manager Hoffman has said several times tonight. We have in the last 9 months seen double to triple pricing on utility infrastructure, specifically pipes and so forth. So we've still been scrambling, trying to get updated engineers' estimates and figuring out the funding for that. So we have been working on the project.
Thanks for that specific. Okay, for example, on the allocation of permits, if we were to put some council work to recommend certain criteria for allocating the permits. So, for example, could we do something like, say we were going to give preference to multifamily developers who committed to inclusive housing units to meet our affordable housing ordinance instead of cash in lieu? Could we do something like that?
Councilmember Lynn, I think that's exactly what we were trying to allude to in the staff memo, not even allude to, but was stating that currently, as is written, council has the ability to exempt any multifamily project, and there's no criteria given. So moving forward, there are reasons that certain age-restricted projects could be exempted already, or why development projects that have a development agreement where there's an economic impact to having the multifamily and being able to get permits, why those would be exempted. But providing some guidance both to the development community and staff who negotiates, as well as other city councils, about why you may consider an exemption would be very beneficial to consider moving forward. So we outlined a few of those in the memo. It could be something like the affordability component, whether they're incorporating units or it's 100% affordable. That would be something that we would need to have direction from city council, as well as whether other priorities or incorporating new priorities or being mixed use or part of an economic vitality project. We kind of listed off a few examples for city council to consider. If that was a part of the direction, that would be very helpful for the community moving forward, so that developers would know this is the expectation. In order to get an exemption, this is what I would need to consider from a project.
And would we have the ability to get recommendations from our independent housing authority now? I mean, I consider them the experts, certainly. I mean, generally speaking, I know we have an awareness in council of we'd rather have the units and not the cash in lieu, but I certainly want to hear from them in the process of setting those preferences or recommendations in the permits. So when we get that.
We can certainly look at that if we were to bring forward a study session specifically on potential changes or an action item. We can certainly reach out to them to get their thoughts.
Okay. I asked, you answered my questions that were repetitive about can we include the recommendations from the zero waste and GHG plans? To be honest, I asked the individual questions about can the designing guidelines include it, can the allocation of permits include it, and can the direction for multifamily development include it, all hoping it was going to be a yes, yes, yes. And then, but now what I heard was, no, the design guidelines are not going to be able to include the zero waste or GHG recommendations. So could you explain that and why that has to be and how it will function out of sync somewhat.
So Councilmember Lynn, the design guidelines may address some environmental sustainability elements, like encouraging xeriscape or addressing dark sky. Those types of elements that are more design oriented that could be incorporated in the design guidelines. But many of the recommendations that we would expect to come out from ACES, we would expect them to be bicycle facilities, addressing the updates to the parking requirements in terms of minimums and maximums, EV charging facility minimums, or guidance, specific guidance, electrification. Those would not live in a design guideline. Those would be code updates, and electrification requirements could even be updates to the building code through strengthening amendments. So that's an even separate process. But each of those requirements lives in an appropriate regulatory document. So design guidelines, I like to think of them more as the aesthetics and the guidance of the site design, really, rather than some of the elements that we expect to see from ACES.
Okay. And I guess I would just want to throw out too that, the question, can we come up with our top 5? Framing that as sustainability versus affordability is I think a false narrative. There are plenty of communities. I can name Breckenridge, Basalt, Crested Butte, many communities which are joining their sustainability and affordability of housing initiatives, and coming forward with great projects, to a large extent with partners. The partners help bring these forward, but certainly I don't want to carry forward a narrative that council is going to have these competing priorities that have to be opposed to each other. So that's just a comment.
Councilmember Lim, I appreciate that. And the priorities are going to compete with each other. When we're attaching dollar amounts, I wish we didn't have to. I would love to have been the city manager pre-COVID for a really long time, right? I mean, again, that was really the start of discovery of having a really disciplined approach. And so I don't say it from a versus, right? I mean, we don't pick our favorite kid. We all say you're equally fabulous. And the priorities that we have right now in this community, again, because it's not a council priority, these are community priorities that the community said this is important to us. So I'm not saying, pick a winner and pick a loser. I'm simply saying from the totality of circumstances, when we're looking, we have to be able to narrow what we're asking for these developers. We've all been on this dais enough where we say, well, this is important, but this is important. And this is really important, but this is the most important. So from a staff perspective, what we're saying is, at least for the next 36 months, we have to all be in agreement on what we're asking up front. And part of that, but back to your question, again, no one is, so when the developers come, if we say, okay, and not just adhering to the inclusionary housing ordinance, right? But a more targeted approach than even that. If you want to build in Broomfield a multifamily unit, you need to supply 100% at 40%. And have EV conduit throughout, and have whatever those other accoutrements are. So rather than us putting a dollar amount to it, those developers on the front end are able to say, yeah, we can do that. Here's what the requirements are. It's not a guarantee that we're going to get through, but if we can get to that kind of focused approach, it'll be good for the community, it'll be good for council, and it'll be good for our financial stability, because then we're going to be able to say, at least we know under what circumstances we're going to be saying yes. It's another control mechanism. Will that preclude multifamily housing developers coming? Probably. For whatever period of time, probably. But those that are able to meet that are exactly the ones we want. Back to Councilmember Cohen's point. We need to be laser focused on what it is that's going to fill what we have left, especially residential, because we know how expensive it is. So again, we will not be all things to all people. We want to be. I want to be. But we aren't there anymore.
Next is Councilmember Lindstedt.
Thank you, Mayor. I guess, for years, I have heard former members of this body say, of all different stripes, of all different beliefs, say that the development pays its own way here in Brookfield. And, I think, based on the discussions we've had over the last 2 years, or the discussions we've had tonight, that isn't true. I don't mean that just in terms of hard infrastructure as a result of the cost of COVID, but I mean that in terms of staffing capacity. I mean, we're talking about 30-year-old area plans that need to be updated, 15-year-old codes, things that, in my view, really need to be prioritized, and there's staff infrastructure that allows for development to occur. And that development right now may have been paying for the inspectors on the ground to keep up with the old codes and keep the inspectors rolling, sort of, with a long delay. But it wasn't paying for the continual update of those codes, of those area plans, of even having a database of development agreements. I mean, we have development agreements riddled with loopholes, liabilities, challenges for the city that I don't think I don't think they were properly vetted. And now we're getting surprised years later. So development hasn't paid its way in terms of creating that infrastructure that allows for that development to have occurred. So that's, it's disappointing to be in this position. That said, kind of a council member Schaaf's point about the residential growth management ordinance of 1998 that I hadn't heard about until about 2 weeks ago, and that hadn't been enforced. I don't see that as a solution to the problem. And I'm probably in the minority saying this, but I think we need to figure out a way, maybe temporarily, maybe permanently, where development can pay for those staffing resources so that we can get moving on all these priorities that need to happen. Maybe developers need to start paying a fee after a certain number of inspections are on the list. Maybe we need to be selling to generate some revenue to build that infrastructure. Because I think it's almost comical to be sitting up here and having a discussion about adding sustainability code when we're thinking about introducing a growth limit that will just create urban sprawl, GHG emissions, and reverse all that progress we're trying to make. I can't get behind that. And I think it would be a mistake. It's funny, some of our neighboring communities went down that path, and yeah, they got a lot of commercial growth. They created a ton of urban sprawl, filled our highways, and destroyed the environment, despite their best intentions. So I'm an absolute no on enforcing that growth management ordinance, even if it is temporarily. I think the fact that it exempts single-family homes and is only targeting multifamily units is offensive. And I have no interest in returning to the thought of 1998 when it comes to development. And I think we need to make developers and pay their own way when it comes to these agreements. I mean, it's hard now that all this is coming to a head at the same point, but I don't think creating more sprawl in the Denver metro region and repeating the mistakes that our neighboring communities made that created these challenges for us is a solution. So I think it's totally antithetical to our diversity and equity and inclusion goals and to our sustainability goals. So I'm a no on that firmly. And I think we need to be more creative about finding other ways to generate revenue and to make sure that developers are actually paying their own way in this community. So I'll have some more comments on other stuff, but I just wanted to put that on the record here when we're in the early phases and all these discussions. So thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Councilmember Anderson.
Thank you. And I just want to share with Councilman Winston, I'm not in disagreement with that. I still think we need to focus on that growth code, but you brought some very interesting points. And I want to go back to what Councilmember Liam had started some of the questions that I had, but then adding on to that thought process, it just seems that as we're prioritizing, if we are going to stay, I don't know if that's 300 units, but if we're going to try to stay in this place where understand the intricacies and the need for all this additional infrastructure and I know from talking to my constituents, they don't want to see a decreased service level. They don't want their taxes. They don't want to see an increase in their tax rate. And so we do need to take this seriously. We don't want to see the sprawl. I mean, I don't see a whole lot of single unit residential units coming forward. We're seeing so much density. So I don't necessarily see that as being a result at this point in time. Maybe it would have been a few years ago. But so if we're looking at projects that we prioritize, is there a benefit to a developer who is bringing forward a commercial component, like mixed use, to bring forward the commercial component with the residential? Would there be the ability to prioritize those developments with density?
I think that's, again, that's part of the ongoing conversation that we will have, again, during each one of these meetings, leading up to some decision-making in August, right? You all need to understand from CIP where we are, what the 2023 budget looks like. Where we are on the infrastructure, what's already been triggered. We'll have a comprehensive view of those business development plans. They are daily, Councilmember Winstead. Daily, those little nuggets. We have the structure now to get a much broader place of recommendation for you all. There are so many exemptions. Anna, will you provide some clarification? Not only, again, it's not a growth cap, and from a sprawl perspective, we don't have any more room to sprawl, quite frankly, right? I mean, again, that conversation was definitely pertinent up to 2010, right? Yeah, so you can sprawl up, I guess, but you can't really sprawl out. Yeah, well, and I mean, again, it's density. And density brings a whole host of other really fundamental structural issues for us right now. So it's a combination of things. We have to pause on some things, not permanently, but we've got to get our breathing space. And Councilmember Anderson, just indulge me for just a moment back to Councilmember Lindstedt in that. It's a multitude of things that we need to do. And I should have a shirt that says development does not pay its own way. I'm not sure where that came from. I'm going to get a t-shirt on. Development pays for the upfront piece. Development has never included staffing. Quite frankly, nor has any of the decisions from this council or any prior council. So those 6,000 units that are in that pipeline, that is no staffing attached to that. No staffing attached to the number of folks that now going from 13 to 16 weeks on these permits. So we're in the process, Anna can speak a little bit about this, but we're already in the process of saying, okay, plan B, plan C, and plan D. Execute them right now, which is the third party paid for by the developer on the front end, and third party paid for by the developer, but working with us to provide some stability for our folks. If we increase anything on planning, it's going to increase the demand on engineering. Again, we can't have that cog in the wheel. So those are all the fundamental conversations. Thank you, Councilmember Anderson, for allowing me to go back for a moment. Anna, clarify some of Councilmember Lindstedt's questions on the exemption, and then if you could provide a little more detail on what exactly, even over the last ballpark 5 years, what would have fit into that 300 unit exemption?
A lot.
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about that.
So thank you, Manager Hoffman. So for some clarifications, I did want to clarify that single family residential does not get exempted from the building permit allocation. That is typically included. Many of our residential developments have vested rights like Baseline and Anthem, or Broadlands, Red Leaf, Dillon Point. Those all have vested rights. Other projects may have development agreements that may have exempted them from allocations. But most single family, if it were to come forward, would have to ask for it through a development agreement or through a vested rights agreement, because only multifamily in the code has a clause that says on a case-by-case basis, City Council can consider it an exemption. And what we're looking for tonight, and moving forward for some of the things that's already been brought up in terms of when considering those exemptions, what are the things that council could consider in terms of that multifamily deserving an exemption because of what it brings to the community, or because of how it supports economic vitality, or some other aspect of why an exemption may be purposeful on a case-by-case basis for those single family. In terms of the last 5 years, many of the multifamily projects have included a case-by-case exemption, again, because all they have to do is ask for it, and it could be considered as part of their project. There were no guidelines attached to an exemption. So that's something that we believe moving forward could be considered by City Council and could help really shape how residential development occurs in Broomfield moving forward, because as has been brought up, we do have a limited space available within our jurisdiction. So those projects, I've already mentioned a handful that have vested rights. Other exemptions include the Lock apartments, which are coming out of the ground soon. All of the projects in Arista have been exempted because there's a development agreement. All of the projects in Anthem, the Brownstones community up on Colorado 7 has an exemption. So many of the projects have an exemption because of their request.
And in order to have the criteria attached to what would be exempted as we move forward, does that need to be, and so I feel like a trial lawyer that I already know the question, but I'm gonna ask it anyway. Would those need to be codified before council could begin executing on those, or is that something that we could put in front prior to the design guidelines and or code modifications?
Manager Hummel, I think it's both. I think a code update would be appropriate to provide that guidance, because the code is already includes the growth ordinance guidelines itself, or regulations, not guidelines. And it could be done before design guidelines. That could be the priority element. And in order to get to the end of the year and have a permit allocation process outlined for you, it really is becoming the top priority by the nature of the fact that we have to get that ready for your review.
So if we could bring ourselves to land on 4 criteria, maybe it turns into 7 later, but if we could start with the 4, prior to the pipeline being executed on by August, and then codify it. Is that something we could do? Say, for example, it was the specific percentage of AMI, EV charging station, wiring, senior housing, age-specific housing, and whatever else it is. If we could come up with 4 outside of a consultant as a body, could we have those implemented and then do codifications?
A little complicated, only in the, many of the projects that are in the pipeline are already approved and have exemptions, so many of these, it wouldn't apply to whether we created the guidelines, but for the future projects that are under consideration, I think that that is something that we can work from and actually might help us guide future development, since often developers are working with us for many months before submitting a request, an application, and might help to guide them while the code is getting addressed. Very similar to how we worked with property owners and developers who were following the reverse setbacks. And we continue to have conversations for all of the months that you all were having study sessions and reviewing individual ordinances. Thank you.
Wow.
How long is 50 seconds? Okay, so yeah, that kind of changed my thought process, but I kind of don't really don't have any other questions. And I would just say, based upon what you just mentioned, as far as those priorities, I would like to see the next presentation on the draft greenhouse gas plan before we, and maybe from that will come those top priorities from a sustainability aspect. And then of course, the one that remains so important here is that long range financial plan, and just making sure that we are balancing this. So that is, I understand the urgency of that. So I appreciate this discussion. I'm looking forward to the more refined requirements coming forward. So thank you.
Thank you. So any other first round comments from council? Before we go to second round, I just want to say thank you. Thank you for doing this deep dive. And in the 5 years I've been reading these memos, I've never seen a summary of our obligation. And it is a wake-up call. I mean, these obligations were made over the years, and were they never compiled in one place, like in a repository?
Mayor, so first, thank you on behalf of every single rock star staff that's in this room. It's a shift. And for the folks that have been here for a while, this my leadership style is vastly different in that everybody at the table is compelled to give their opinion, and opinion as in, this makes me anxious. This is not a good idea professionally, right? I mean, going from a siloed approach that worked well for Broomfield. Again, all of the prior councils and the prior staff, I fundamentally believe they did their best with what was available at the time. It's just this council, again, has the inevitable position of all of these things are now coming home to roost, right? All the agreements that taking over, our great friend in Skystone, right? And that's $1.5 million.
So to go back, these were not being tracked.
They were tracked mentally. But that's the shift, Mayor, right? Is that we are expecting people to train their replacements. And not have this golden key approach. And it's a fundamental shift, and it has taken us a good 4 months and heavy lifts in order to pull from each one of these places. It's a little treasure hunt.
Right, treasure. Well, I mean, I've always looked at the undeveloped area in my Ward 5 And part of why I ran in the first place in 2017, so that I could help shepherd what that looks like, right? I mean, that's our last big area to develop. And I'm reading that we have an obligation to build all the water and sewer infrastructure for all of that land as it gets developed. Correct?
Yes,
And do we have a cost for that? Any kind of like price attached to it or?
so that was the fun, that's Councilmember Shapp and I were talking, he saw me driving home last night and it was just one of those just big yawns and he drives by and he's, maybe, you know, we are working hard in order to get that. So what was not programmed, again, we have to start with what we have agreed to, not what we want, right? And so again, the discovery really does bring us to,
It's sobering.
it's more than sobering. I think sobering is, the next day, you can digest and do something with it, right? But
Right.
on this, it requires all of us to work as a team to move us in a direction. And it starts with the compilation of each one of those and attaching the best guess that we have. But as Ms. Allen said this morning, she had gotten a bid on, not a bid, but an amount from McWinney 3 weeks ago. It's tripled. And it's a 6-month delay in piping. So, I mean, that's where we are. That's the relative nature to which all things, that's the lens we need to see it through.
So my next question is with the obligations to build that infrastructure. If we don't have the funds, would it preclude development of that area? I mean, is
I'm gonna
there
have
one
Ms.
that
Bertanzetti, yeah.
trigger that?
You're asking all the right questions.
Okay.
So potentially, there could be, there may be developments that can't occur until Broomfield is able to bring the infrastructure to them. But a project of enough scale, Mayor, may be able to front the costs and would then request a reimbursement. There was a project many years ago, I think around 2007, 2008, that had a PUD plan approved east of I-25. And that was their intent at the time. It didn't move forward, but they would pay to install the infrastructure and then request reimbursement over time from the revenue generated, similar to McMinney and other developments.
Okay, so that is one way to deal with it.
Well, not really though.
Okay.
And so here's a little more sobering, right? So when they pay for it up front, there's no way for us to budget. So it's another one of those little nuggets that we've agreed to reimburse, but we can't plan for it. We don't know what the costs are. And so we can hold to their management of it, but whatever the bids that come in, that was part of the conversation this morning with Katie. For our budgetary purposes, so even if we're aware of what that reimbursement agreement says, when the population triggers what that looks like, then wherever they are, when they are saying, okay, here's what the 160, perfect example, right? So if we don't have that programmed and budgeted, what needs to go in order to make that happen, right? And so it's more complicated because then we have the road work, we have the development, we have the pain point for the infrastructure. So understanding these, as sobering as it is, and as tough as it is to swallow, understanding where we are is the first step. But anytime that it's a reimbursement agreement, that adds a completely different level of unknown.
Then lastly, with the different development agreements that you have listed here, Town Square, Flatirons Crossing, Marketplace, Westbrook Baseline, Anthem, Highlands, Arista, Triton, Palisade Park, Northlands, and Parkway Circle, where we have offered subsidies, tax subsidies, and other discounts and revenues. Is this a comprehensive list or is there more?
No. This is not a comprehensive list. This is what, this is our initial work from having the conversation, I don't know, 6 weeks ago of, we've got to get to the place where this isn't daily, right? Where staff isn't coming in saying, Jennifer, okay, here's a, I mean, just not only from a sanity perspective. Anna, fill in the blanks a little bit for me, would you?
Sure, Mayor, we really try to focus on the development agreements that are currently underway, have some obligations. But there are also likely some smaller obligations, especially those annexation agreements that were done. There could be more, and we are continuing to compile a list. We're also working on a database and a map that would go along with it that will help with moving forward, as Manager Hoffman mentioned, just making sure that we're very transparent and also that the information is available to all staff about all of these applications and easily accessible.
Awesome. I think that's wonderful. Again, I'm grateful for you all doing this work to pull it together. I know it's not easy. So then I think, wow, we worked so hard to streamline development the last couple of years, and maybe we shouldn't have.
Oh, you know, I that's, it led us to understanding the structural deficiencies. So I wouldn't change one thing that we've done.
It was kind of a joke.
Oh, okay. See, I'm just so
Now we're
serious
gonna
now about all
follow
this
it.
stuff.
That was my joke. Okay, sorry. Let's go to second round. Councilmember Ward.
Thank you, Mayor. I guess the question I came up with is how many other projects that are not currently in the construction phase, like baseline and whatnot, have vested rights?
Thank you, Councilmember Ward. I don't have the map available this evening, but there are a number of projects that have some vested rights. Dillon Point is starting construction. That has more recent vested rights. Baseline and Anthem, I think there's probably 8 or 9 residential developments that have vested rights already with Brookfield. But we can certainly follow up with council and provide that map as well as a list.
Okay, thank you. My next question that I came up with is for residential and even commercial development, how much, what's the best way to phrase this? How much cost is associated to some of the codes that we have, like the parking minimums, our setbacks that we have set forth? Whatnot? Do you have a way of quantifying that number at all?
Councilmember Ward, I don't think I really have a way to quantify that in terms of the impact, but if we were to bring code amendments forward, we could certainly talk with some developers and try to understand the scale of the impact financially on them if we were to say increase parking minimums and therefore require more additional land to be used for parking. We could certainly include that as much as we can as part of the analysis. It might not be a dollar amount, but we can provide some type of scaling or some information from our development community.
Okay, thank you. And my last couple of things, I do want to thank all of Brookfield staff for doing what you guys do. It allows us to do what we are supposed to do, and it's really much appreciated. And then lastly, I want to say I need to stop going first with my questions so I can have comments like Councilmember Lindstadt. Because I think what Councilmember Lindstadt said is right on the nail. You know, there are consequences to us curtailing our residential development that have further implications with traffic, greenhouse gas emissions by essentially forcing other communities to absorb that residential need that we create with an increase in commercial development, like we're seeing with Boulder right now. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Schaaf.
Thank you, Mayor. And I just want to start by thanking staff for their vulnerability in this conversation. This is a very uncomfortable conversation for me. I always tell my fellow council members, you know, development is the most important decision that we will make. And to think about 4 years of developments that I've approved, it's easy for me to go back and nitpick at all of those decisions. And that's just on those 4 years. So, I do think that this is a very vulnerable conversation, and I thank you all for bringing this forward. I wanted to follow up on Councilmember Lidstead's points in terms of the sprawl. So I think that this isn't just sprawl within Broomfield, but this is sprawl, within the Front Range and the Eastern Plains. And I think that, we're already seeing this. We're already seeing the expansion toward the east. There's, neighborhoods upon neighborhoods of single-family housing that continue to grow, and no doubt, some of those employees are commuting to the west into economic centers. So, I'm curious what the regional conversations are regarding growth, especially along the Front Range within this kind of northern metro area, to find out, how do we do this as a region, as opposed to just doing one-offs and impacting somebody else, basically further to the east or the north.
Councilmember Schaaf, I liken that question. There's a lot of communication about regionalism and regional approach. There always has been. And so I always find it fascinating when homelessness is a great example, right? Like, what is the regional approach? Regional approach turns into NIMBY when someone else has to pay for someone else's resident or employer. That just is what it is. So from the regional conversation, everybody's choking. Everybody's choking with the amount of costs, the positions of, we won't ever struggle for residential developers. We won't. It doesn't matter what we put on them. It's where the money is. You can see that in the representation of the breakdown. Councilmember Lim, thank you for asking that. So out of the 6,000 units that were approved, we do an analysis for how much just the services cost. We don't have, we haven't calculated what it means for infrastructure, water, sewer, any of those CIPs, because we're still discovering that. And out of the 6,000, we have a fraction that's for sale. And quite frankly, we have a fraction that are affordable. And again, affordable is that's a misnomer. I mean, when you're talking about 80%, 60% to 80% AMI, our teachers and police officers don't qualify for that. So in order to have a regional conversation, communities have to not have the fear factor of how much exponentially everything is costing. Staffing, all of those other conversations that are fundamental to staying viable. Any of those other conversations, while worthy, the struggle right now isn't about affordable housing. Quite frankly, it's not about the being environmentally thoughtful. The conversation, I came back from the city county managers conference, and it was a really fundamental eye-opening that Broomfield is heads and tails further along any of the other communities that I spoke to up there. But the struggle is real. The conversations have fundamentally changed to how do we provide the fundamental services, and everything else is taking a back seat. I know that that's super unpopular for me to say, but that is what it is right now. It's a very different mindset, Councilmember Schaaf, and again, it's not even survival of the fittest among regional partners. It's just survival. we're gonna see significant budget cuts. Again, we talk about what is a good indicator of where we are, from the state conversations, when you have OSPB, Office of Budget Planning and Budget, that says, and Councilmember Lindstedt can totally attest to this, we talk about Ledge Council and OSPB. When they are saying the spending from the state perspective, all of the new programs, well intended, but the structural defect in the budget for the state of Colorado will come home to roost, not slowly, not gradually. It will be a pounding in 2024. A pounding. That's always a good indicator for what it looks like, what that trickle down will look like for municipalities and county governments. A structural deficit. So that's not like a revenue deficit. So again, I think that the regional approach is going to be the survival instinct will kick in, particularly when the state structural deficits from a program perspective that people are going to become accustomed to, that is needed, there's no doubt. But when they become accustomed to it, then the pressure becomes even more outside of housing for social programs. So again, it's the perfect storm. And that's a really long answer about the regional approach. But folks, if they aren't right now, by the beginning of 2023, it will be self-survival. When the ARPA money is lessening for a lot of these communities that are heavily dependent on it. And the state, and those other programmatic things. So when a community is healthy, you're more inclined to say, let's have a regional approach. Let's share mind, let's revenue share, because your tolerance, you have more capacity to be thinking positive and hope. That's not the future. I know, this seems like I'm doom and gloom here. But it's the reality of the situation.
Yeah, I think it's an uncomfortable reality. Mr. Romine and I presented to the Boulder Consortium. I didn't present. Mr. Romine presented in my place and did a fabulous job to the Boulder Consortium of cities. This is an uncomfortable conversation. I think many of those municipalities were shocked. As I heard from some staff members, it really set up the conversation very well in terms of, oh, wow, we have a lot more to think about and to deal with than we thought we did. So this is a very uncomfortable conversation. And again, thank you for bringing this forward.
Councilmember Marshall.
Thank you, Mayor. I just have one quick question and then a comment. Going on Councilmember Lindstedt's comment earlier, is there a number of a developer fee we could implement that would allow us extra staff to do the work that needs to be done to update the codes, for example? Is that something that we could get them to pay their own way, I guess?
So let me just clarify. So that's really not them paying their own way?
Right. Yeah, partially.
Ms. Britton-Zetti.
Thank you, council member. Some fees have a very specific purpose, and so we wouldn't be able to modify them, like the building permit fees, which help to pay for inspections. As council member Hoffman mentioned, we are working with developers to have them pay for some third-party inspections, and may consider using some of the building permit fees to pay for a third-party inspector to work on behalf of Broomfield as well to keep those staffing. But if in terms of a new fee, I think is what you're asking, that would be specific to that development purpose. I think that's something that we'd have to look more into and could bring back at one of the future study sessions.
It just seems that the code update is something that's vital for a lot of different areas. And if we could find a way to pay for the additional staff time necessary to do that, that would be something that I would support. And then just one other comment, going off of some other comments. I have never supported residential housing caps. I don't think they're a good idea. I think for all the reasons that have been talked about. That being said, like I don't think there is a single family home development. I can't not see one coming forward that I would actually approve at this point. I think it's the wrong approach that we need. But I also, to some other points, we can't just offload our housing needs to other communities. We need a sustainable approach, and that to me means we have to have mixed use developments. Just like I couldn't see approving a single family development, I couldn't see approving a strip mall at this point either. I think we need both, we need sustainable walkable communities where people don't have to drive, where people can work where they live and not have to commute every other place. And I think I know the finances on that are difficult as far as paying for the services that those people will require. But I think that's the direction I think that we as a community should be going. And that's the only comment on this. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Cohen.
I'll be brief. Just real quickly in terms of the 1998 ordinance that hasn't been enforced, I would agree with Councilmember Linstead, just repeal it. It's literally from another century. And it has no relevance to our current situation. We just need to draft a new one that speaks to our current experience. I would just ask going forward when we have the discussion again, because I think the summary of this discussion is there's 1,000 if, ands, or buts to every scenario. And everywhere you turn, that if they could develop a list of scenarios that we know what our objectives are, we want certain level, maintain our level of service and maintain ourselves as a lower taxed community compared to our neighbors. That may be a very hard thing to maintain going forward, but that's what our objective is. So I'd be interested in knowing the scenarios of doing nothing, letting it play out, to adopting something more on this more stringent end of caps, or other scenarios of growth that speaks to how do we develop the revenue we need, whether it's, I don't know if mixed use pays for it. Maybe it's not enough. Maybe we just need to really approach a commercial first scenario. Whether no more single family is a scenario, what that plays out, I don't know. But without having those kind of scenarios described and speculated upon, it's really hard to choose a path and trying to avoid unintended consequences. So that would be my request going forward, that we just pick 6 paths and figure out what the costs would be for each one.
So, yes, please. Councilmember Cohen, the reason I'm hesitating is as soon as we are at that point structurally, we'll absolutely do that. We are not there. We will not be there until we come in August with what those recommendations are. But you can expect every meeting similar to this one will build upon the one before. So there aren't decisions to make tonight. There won't be decisions on the next meeting, nor the third meeting. They will have a cumulative effect when we get to August. So again, having those 6 scenarios will eventually be important, but right now, understanding the piece of where we are with the development. My question on the residential is 6,000 units coming on in the next 24 months. I do not see as shirking our responsibility at all from those other communities. I see that as we have done our fair share for this period of time until we can swallow. Those scenarios, Councilmember Cohen, is exactly what we're doing with the enterprise funds right now. So we're running now modeling. So when we come to council to pay for what we have obligated ourselves to pay for based on those 6,000 new people coming, based on our additional folks and our existing residents, right? So that whole misnomer that development pays for itself is patently not the case. So our current residents are gonna be saying, okay, well, so what part of that is the new development that we've agreed to because we're good regional partners and we want affordable housing? And what part of it is shoring up what that infrastructure looks like for those fundamental pieces? And that's part of the conversation on, and that goes back to the mayor's question too, is there's the modeling that we haven't done a rate study since 2012. There's just another little sliver of something, right? And the modeling, prior to 2018 was, incremental increases, sometimes up to 7%. No, that wasn't done because increasing water rates is unpopular. Clearly, this needs to be the council that doesn't care about being popular, or the city manager that doesn't care about being unpopular. We care about financial stability. And so running those models on if it stayed the same, if it was status quo, what it looks like. One option, two options, and then a hybrid approach. So structurally, Councilmember Cohen, we think in those terms. We don't know enough to apply it to development yet. Just gonna be one fun meeting after the other here.
All right, Councilmember Lindstedt?
Thank you, Mayor. I don't know if you all know this, but I get a little bit passionate when it comes to land use and housing and those needs. I did just want to close by reminding my colleagues that we are the decision makers when it comes to approving those change of uses and those implications of those changes of use. And I don't think we need to hide behind an artificial filter before making those decisions. I agree with Councilmember Cohen. Let's scrap this ordinance, and if we need to rethink of, I don't want to cap, but if we need to think of some other way to set the parameters early for developers to know what is likely to be approved, let's do it. But yeah, we are the decision makers, and we can decide, on each of these developments. And what we need to do is make sure developers know what we're looking for up front. And I just think this is a little bit of a blunt tool to do that. So I'll just close by saying that. And thank you, staff, for putting this together. It really was one of the most interesting, informative memos that I've read up here in several years. So I appreciate it. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Any other council member comments? Councilmember Anderson.
Thank you, and I appreciate that comment, Councilmember Lindstedt. I just want to mention that if we slow residential growth is something we can manage, which sounds like that is where we're at right now, and I appreciate the comment that we are doing our share. We have so many units that we're having a hard time keeping up. It's coming forward at such a fast pace. So with or without a 1998 ordinance, whatever we need to put in place, we absolutely have to slow it to something we can manage. And that shouldn't lead to sprawl, but we should be doing this in such a thoughtful way that we're developing exactly what we want to develop for Broomfield from that standpoint. And not increase our greenhouse gases and add more vehicle miles traveled and all of that, but just thoughtful approach, exactly what we need, but at the rate that we can actually handle it, because I hear staff loud and clear on this. So I want to share that, but I'm not, whatever the outcome is, I don't have a specific, without a 300 unit cap, just what we can manage, and also that financial stability piece, because I know our residents do not want tax increases, and they want those services still. So what we can manage is good. So thank you.
All right, anyone else? Yeah, I think my final thought would be, we know that each residential rooftop actually costs us money based on what property taxes we get to retain, as opposed to what goes out to the school districts, the metro districts, the fire district, the flood district, or whatever district. Each rooftop is not a revenue producing. It costs us. I could ballpark it $3,000 per rooftop?
Well, in the estimation that we had done before, that doesn't include, it includes the services, but not the infrastructure, right? And so just based on that, Mayor, it was, 2,700, and again, that was in pre-awful days. Was what it, and the revenue that we retained was 1,300. That's a big gap.
Certainly is something to be mindful of. That's why we need the ballot. So thanks again, everyone, for going through this journey with us, and we'll just take it one step at a time. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, we're going to take our 10-minute recess. It's 8:01. We'll be back at 8:11. All right, we're back. Our next and final study session item this evening is draft greenhouse gas plan. Council members have a copy of the agenda memorandum, which I'll ask our staff to summarize.
Thank you, Mayor. So for this item, we'll have Andrew Valdez, our interim director of strategic initiatives and master of the universe, as we call him, walking us through this presentation. And I believe Camille Hall, yes, there's Camille right there, is also with us.
Thank you.
Thank you, Abby. Good evening, Mayor and City Council. I was ready to talk about something fun. So we're very pleased this evening to present the findings of our greenhouse gas planning effort. While the planning process itself was about a year long, this product that you see linked in your memos represents the culmination of many years worth of work from this and previous classes of ACEs, as well as our internal departments, external partners. So I'd like to recognize them and contribute to this effort. And we have two current members of ACEs here in the crowd today, Aaron Hune and Brandon Mock. So thank you. And of course, we'd like to express our gratitude to Broomfield City Council for elevating this issue to a priority and making the necessary investment to get us to this point. Before we move into content of the plan, I just want to level set a little bit. We're presenting the findings of the plan this evening, no proposals tonight or recommendations. The plan is our policy roadmap that'll get us from where we are to where we want to be. And as we move to implementation, staff will continue to work as a team to plan, budget, and execute our strategy, while of course keeping council informed and seeking our approvals as needed. So with that, let's get started. Next slide, please, Jake. So I always like to begin these presentations with a timeline graphic to sort of put everything into context. So Broomfield's original Environmental Advisory Task Force was established in 2018. And in 2020, the ACES Advisory Committee was established along with our greenhouse gas reduction goals, which are up there on the screen. In brief, we're trying to achieve a 90% reduction in our greenhouse gas footprint from 2017 levels by 2050. These are ambitious targets. However, they are in line with international climate objectives and are benchmarked with other peer communities in Colorado, as well as the state plan. 2021 was a year of intensive planning. We performed a lot of data gathering and analysis, did quite a bit of outreach and engagement, and fleshed out this policy roadmap. So this takes us to this evening and the presentation of the plan. And so this is our opportunity to check in with council, receive feedback on our proposed strategy. But again, any policy or project will be subject to further public engagement, staff resourcing, and budgeting processes. And then looking forward, we have 2025 and 2030 as our first and second milestone year goals. Next slide. Right, so on the screen here, we have our reduction targets for both the community and for Broomfield government. These goals were developed in collaboration with ACES and adopted in September 2020. Final goal is to reduce community-wide greenhouse gas emissions by 90% by 2050 and municipal emissions by 100% on the same year. As we approach that target year, at least for Broomfield City, we may need to look at offsets to achieve that final 10%. I did also want to make a linkage between our zero waste goals and our greenhouse gas goals. There is about a 1-to-1 benefit in carbon dioxide equivalent emissions from each metric ton of waste diverted from the landfill. For 2020, Broomfield's waste diversion avoided 9,100 metric tons of CO2 equivalent emissions. And this would be from methane emissions that are released from decomposition of organics. We're still working on our 2021 data for our waste diversion, but we do hope to see that trend line going in the right direction, obviously. And improvements in organics collection will bump this number up even higher. As I mentioned, last year, we conducted a pretty extensive outreach engagement effort related to both greenhouse gas and zero waste initiatives. We held 6 public open houses, did direct outreach to businesses and service providers, conducted some online surveys, and engaged a number of HOAs and other community organizations. Not surprisingly, we heard pretty enthusiastic support for Broomfield's overall pivot to sustainability. However, I do want to underscore here that community support for specific programs and policies will depend on how those are crafted and presented to the public. Last point I'll make before I turn the presentation over, as we develop this plan for implementation, we'll continue to work with other Broomfield departments to ensure any project or proposal is on solid ground before anything is launched. So with that, I'll turn it over to Aaron.
Next slide, please. So I'm Aaron Hune. I'm the current chair of ACES, and I've served in that role for the last year, and I've served on ACES since its inception in 2018. So just to sort of give some background on what is in the plan. First of all, this is a pie chart of where our GHGs come from as it stands today. And what you will notice is outside of solid waste and food and some other smaller segments, the bulk of it comes from residential buildings, commercial buildings, and on-road transportation. So the bulk of the plan is to address those 3 sectors. So if we think about this, transportation and buildings are really the 2 focuses, and buildings can sort of be broken down into current direct burning of fossil fuels and current use of electricity and how we reduce the emissions from both of those. Next slide, please. So what you end up finding out is grid decarbonization plays a huge role in all of this. It plays a huge role in the transportation because EVs become more carbon efficient as the grid becomes less carbon intensive. So EV adoption is important, but EV adoption only gets us so far as we currently have a 70% fossil fuel grid. So we need a combination on the transportation side of EV adoption as well as grid decarbonization. From the building perspective, we need to reduce our current electric consumption on that 70% fossil fuel grid, and then we need to decarbonize that 70% needs to go away, and then we need to convert the greenhouse gases. We need to convert the direct burning of fossil fuel to the electric uses as the grid becomes more decarbonized. So you'll see that we are very, very dependent on the grid becoming decarbonized, and that's mostly the responsibility of partners at Xcel Energy, Public Service of Colorado, and United Power. So our focus is more on these other sections, where we can have the most impact is on these other sections that are not the grid decarbonization. So that is residential building electrification, commercial building electrification, residential efficiency, commercial efficiency, EV adoption, and reducing vehicle miles traveled. Next slide, please. So part of the plan is about doing the right programs at the right time. And what that gets to is that there are certain technologies where electrifying today may actually increase our carbon footprint. But 10 years from now, it would reduce our carbon footprint as the grid becomes less dependent on fossil fuels and more or less GHG intensive. And so this plan moves slowly over time where we leverage the grid decarbonization. We participate and encourage energy efficiency programs, and we support EV adoption because fortunately, electric vehicles are currently less carbon intensive than internal combustion engines. So any move to electric vehicles now is a productive one. And then that electrification becomes more and more valuable over time as the grid becomes less carbon intensive. So this is sort of the long range plan, starting with foundational, moving into transportational, and then into our aspirational goals to help us achieve our goals by 2050. And I will turn it over to the Community Sustainability Manager, Camille Palmer.
Thank you, council members. I know this topic is of interest to everyone here, and I'm very excited about the enthusiasm that we've heard from this body as well as from the community. And so if we go to the next slide, we can talk about some of the other benefits. Aaron walked through some of the pathways that we can get, that we can follow to get us to our carbon reduction. However, we're not just talking about the environment. We're not just talking about the planet. There are so many other benefits that we can achieve as we walk through this path together towards GHG reduction. There are many intertwined benefits related to economic vitality, community well-being, as well as environmental stewardship. And I think environmental stewardship is really at the foundation of a lot of the values that many of our Broomfield residents hold dear. But we also need to think about the fact that we really cannot have, and it's not responsible to support a GHG reduction plan that is not inclusive and does not lift everyone up. So we took a lot of effort to focus on DEAI in this plan and think about ways that we can develop solutions that are not just available to people who can pay for them out of pocket, right? We want to provide solutions to people who may not be able to afford the sustainability offerings, or they may not know about them, or they may not know about the benefits. So we are mindful of the fact that we have a responsibility as ACES, as staff, as council as well, to provide equitable benefits. So some of the benefits that we see from these plans include things like greater public health. Of course, we can improve our air quality, and we've all seen recently some of the terrible air quality that we've had in the Front Range. We can do something about that, working in concert with other regional governments, which we are. And again, environmental justice. If we look at the most disproportionately impacted communities that suffer from the environmental stressors related to climate change, we have those members of our community here in Broomfield. People who are not able to afford solar panels or afford electric vehicles or have to live next to industrial sites. So those are type of residents that we want to focus on as well through our policies. And there are other benefits related to green jobs. And we already have a booming industry in Colorado, and we have a new wind farm training facility here in Broomfield, which is a fantastic asset. And these are very high paying jobs. And you don't need a college degree to get these jobs, most of them. And so that's obviously a way to attract talent. In addition, we have community resilience in the power infrastructure. And then another element I would add relates to what you all have been talking about the past couple of hours, which is affordability. So housing becomes more affordable when energy becomes more affordable. They're intertwined. So we focus on that as well, especially related to energy efficiency. Next slide, please. So we've already made some progress. We know that this is our pathway to get to 2025, 2030, et cetera, and our interim goals. So we had the opportunity to develop a partnership with United Power to do a green power purchase last year. And this allowed us to essentially advance 14% towards our 2025 goals. So we're already moving in the right direction. So essentially through this purchase, the municipal properties at CCOB, they were able to purchase 1 million kilowatt hours per year of wind energy. And then in this renewable subscription format, this allows us to expand on our capital investment And it's a pretty decent price. That's why we jumped on it. We only paid 9 cents premium per 100 kilowatt hours. And so the carbon offset is essentially 575 metric tons per year. So this is an opportunity that we want to continue to pursue. And we want to ensure that we're able to take advantage of elements like this with our partners that can help us move forward. Next, please. Another element that that we've already advanced on is with our EPC, the Energy Performance Contract, and we have a partnership with McKinstry, and McKinstry is represented here tonight. Ashley's from McKinstry, so essentially they're helping us with the project that the council approved in 2021, and we're leading by example by addressing energy needs, energy reduction in municipal properties through this contract. So it's essentially a process where we identify savings through the McKinstry analysis, and we're able to use savings to the energy savings as payment to support the investment in our infrastructure. So for this type of project, the long-term payout essentially becomes revenue positive as we achieve energy savings on municipal property. So that's of course a huge impact for our budget. And I also want to say that through this project in the Energy Performance Contract, we've had a great partnership with the facilities team. They already work on, they have state-of-the-art best practices for equipment operations and maintenance through Kimberly Dahl's team and Jill Johnson. So they already take the management of their portfolio of buildings to, they have a high degree of competency and they take a lot of pride in what they do. And so what the McKinstry contract has allowed us to do is take that even further and identify what gaps we already have and present a learning opportunity for us to save money and highlight areas of improvement. Next slide, please. So as we look ahead, as Andrew mentioned at the beginning, we have this roadmap, which essentially gives us the guides for how we want to proceed in prioritizing and strategizing on energy and transportation policies and programs. And it is very deliberative, right? We are going to be approaching these processes one by one, and we're going to be starting with the foundational elements, which are the things we can do tomorrow that are pretty easy to do. And then we want to identify near impact or near-term wins that will be impactful and leveraging existing resources. That's obviously a huge benefit. So as we move diligently towards the goal, we'll be coordinating staff with ACES, and anything that is requiring a budget or investment or policy will be brought before City Council individually so that we can move forward with the council's full input. And we also are doing ongoing vetting with the CCLB departments. Throughout this entire planning process, we've met with many departments as we figure out what is the best way to proceed and leverage their resources and their expertise in guiding policies and programs. And we also want to be able to identify intentional and intended and unintended consequences of each of these. So we will be developing more detailed analyses in the format that we're calling an impact analysis that shows the long-term impact of each program before implementation. And then, of course, having additional community engagement. And we will also be reporting on our GHG inventory annually. And we intend to update this plan every 5 years. So with that, I'm going to pass it back to Andrew.
Next slide, please. So we received some great questions from council, which we received in advance of the meeting, which we always appreciate. So thank you for that. And I even learned some stuff here. So we'll get into these and then we can have a question. The first one is, what is the estimated percentage of electric car sales by 2025, 2030, 2050? as well as estimated share of electric cars as a percentage of total. So in 2021, EV registrations made up 6.5% of new vehicle sales, and that accounted for 8.1% of total market share. The state is projecting a total of 1 million EVs on the road and registered by 2030, which would be about a 45 to 50% market share. Beyond that, I think the estimates get a little murky because just like we are, car manufacturers and vendors are relying on updates in technology, especially for like SUVs, freight vehicles, trucks, and things like that before those can come online. So that's number one. What policies is the state implementing to ensure EV batteries are recycled in the most environmentally conscious way possible? So this was an excellent question. It's not currently addressed in the state GHG reduction roadmap or the state GHG plan. This gap was identified in a study done by Colorado State University, published in 2021. And they recommended that the state commission a task force to develop and recommend a policy action plan for the life cycle management of these lithium ion batteries. Policy gaps and potential frameworks, and it's linked in your council documents, start on page 34 of the study if you want to do the deep dive. But there's an entire industry with green jobs that could be developed based off of this issue. It's not a problem right now, but as more EVs are purchased and are eventually retired, it will become a problem. Disposal and circular economy type things, right? All right, number 3, Colorado Energy Office has a goal to increase public charging stations, both level 2 and DC fast charge. How is Broomfield coordinating with CEO? And what is the timeline for those charging stations? So we have leveraged 2 EV charging stations with grant funding from Charge Ahead Colorado. And this is part of the Colorado Energy Office partnership with the Regional Air Quality Council. The program covers up to 80% of the cost of installations. That's like hardware and soft cost installation, construction, things like that. And so we have one installed at Paul Rec Center and the other at Health and Human Services. Both are level 2 fast chargers, 2 pedestals, and are available to the public. I think, so the next call for applications is late May, and Broomfield will be applying likely for a fleet charging station to charge CCOV vehicles. And then finally, I think one of the next things that we want to do in the near term is analyze kind of the gaps in our network from a regional perspective and see what kind of areas or corridors we want to prioritize for investing in further grant funding and partnerships with the local landowners. We don't obviously own land everywhere. All right, what is CCFE's TDMP, says the transit guy. And what is the timeline for implementation? So that is a transportation demand management plan. We don't have one currently. We have a telework policy. And I wouldn't speak for Sarah's group, but I think it's something potentially could be looked at on the staff side. But I do know that sometimes those work on kind of a state level or kind of regional level. And at a local level, it may not have quite as much traction. Right, how many businesses within Broomfield, including Broomfield, offer an EcoPass program? So this surprised me. At this time, we're not aware of any businesses that are taking advantage of EcoPass, and I know Broomfield doesn't. Having looked into this issue just personally for me, because I like taking the bus, it's pretty cost prohibitive. It's very expensive to get an EcoPass. So for a lot of folks, just it doesn't make sense. And then with fare cuts and things like that, it's tough. It's a tough value proposition to pitch to the public, and even for employers and things. So that's kind of where that's at. There's a little bit more in there in case we want to go further, but we'll kind of move on in the interest of time. Has Broomfield, I like this one, has Broomfield begun discussions around an e-bike and e-scooter share program similar to Boulder Bike Share? So staff recently received an unsolicited proposal from an e-scooter, e-bike mobility service to operate in Broomfield. We are bringing appropriate departments within the next few weeks to discuss this. Additionally, Commuting Solutions will be exploring options to expand Boulder's B-Cycle program to more Northwest communities over the next year. And finally, how did Broomfield decide on a 15 VNT reduction by 2040? Can we go for a more aggressive reduction? So the 15% came from a sample trajectory provided by our technical service providers who consulted on development of the draft plan. And this was a reasonably aggressive pathway for us to achieve our transportation, our BNT reduction goals. We also didn't want to stray too far from the goals laid out in the Denver Regional Council of Governments plan, which targets a 10% reduction by 2040. So actual BNT reduction in Broomfield will depend on the pace of implementation for overlapping multimodal strategies over the next several decades. As currently stated, Broomfield's goals are, as we think, appropriately aggressive. So I think that concludes the questions that we received, and we have our brain trust here to answer any further questions we have. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Valdez and Ms. Paula and Mr. Hume. Councilmember Ward, would you like to go first?
Thank you, Mayor. I laughed because those were all my questions. And I was surprised no one else submitted any. But anyways, thank you guys for this presentation. Very informative, very helpful for us making policy decisions. One of the questions I have in regards to the presentation that was just given was there was hardly any, unless I just completely missed it, talk about use of public transit as a method of reducing greenhouse gas emissions, reducing vehicle miles traveled, et cetera, and also addressing the issue of accessibility with regards to DEAI. Why was that not included with this presentation? And has ACES really taken a hard look at this issue?
Go a little off script here. So yeah, I actually started my career in transportation planning. So, you don't have to sell me on it. Sustainability is a tough thing when people are asked to sacrifice for it. But if transit were cheap and affordable and convenient, people would make that choice anyway because it was the path of least resistance, right? And we're unfortunately saddled with the urban built environment landscape that we do have here in Broomfield, for better or for worse. I'm not going to editorialize there, but you guys might have seen the Ghost Train or listened to Ghost Train podcast. Transit is not if you build it, they will come proposition, unfortunately, and it does take significant investment. So while we do see that as one of the kind of arrows in the quiver, I think we're going to get closer to our goals potentially by focusing in other areas. Last thing I'll say on that is, a lot of these, and I heard this was mentioned earlier tonight, so I'm not bringing it up, but a lot of progressive communities are looking at not doing single family housing anymore. And it really is a question of density. And if you have the density, you have a lot of more opportunity to leverage, I think, transit options and transit-oriented development and all the rest. So I'll stop there before I get in trouble.
Yeah, it's a great question. Thank you so much for asking. And we did talk about transportation quite a lot in the ACES Transportation Subcommittee. And we had Sarah Grant and Mark Ambrosi from the transportation staff on those committees as well, participating and contributing. And I think one of the things that that we mentioned in the actual report is focusing on incentivizing and further aiding people to ride public transportation. So clearly within the bounds of our county, we don't have the jurisdiction to create additional public transportation routes that connect regionally, but we do have the ability through incentives to help people access existing services. And then we also have the ability to expand some of our micro mobility, whether it's, as you mentioned, e-bikes, e-scooters. We also focused on, we mentioned in the report as well, the possibility of an EV car share program and advocating for expansion of bike lanes and walking paths and other services for the senior and disabled residents within the city.
All right, thank you for that. I guess my only concern with that is you're leaving out, at least in this particular presentation, which I think will reach more people than that particular document. Well, I don't know how much of the population will actually go through and read that full, what was it, 60 something or something page document, 80. And I know there's the executive summary, but if you really want to get to the meat of it, you have to actually read the document. And I think by not really addressing public transit in this particular presentation, you're missing out on a key aspect of reducing these greenhouse emissions in vehicle miles traveled. And has the committee talked about Broomfield implementing its own local public transit agency? As far as I know we have technically that legal right to do so. I know it's not financially cheap to do that.
We have, so the transportation folks might be better able to speak to this, but I know we have like a call and ride program. You know, it's kind of focused on that first mile, last mile problem. As far as I know, kind of a local transit authority had not been discussed in the transportation subcommittee or any meeting. But adding it to, I think, maybe highlight it more as a strategy, I think your point is taken.
So I was deep in thought on something else until I heard that very last comment. Councilmember Moore, stop me in my tracks. I would like to say that we could entertain even the concept of that. We cannot. At least at this moment, at this moment in time, there are so many other pressing, again, that's the need list and want list. And that definitely falls into the want list. And you're going to be here for 4 years. And I very much hope to be having this conversation subsequent to 36 months from today.
Yes, thank you. I by no means meant to have it as a discussion for today. I know we have a lot of systemic changes that need to occur for Broomfield to support that kind of investment. And I hope to have those conversations later down the road. And I only say that because given RTD's current structure, I don't think we can rely on them to meet our local transportation needs, regionally, airport, rail, et cetera. Sure. And then I guess the last thing I want to say, at least for the time being, in regards to a comment Mr. Valdez made regarding single family homes. Yes, I would be all for eliminating the ability to construct new single family homes from the code.
Thank you. Councilmember Marshall.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll second Councilmember Ward's last statement. I have several questions. I want to thank you all for the excellent work you've done. I think you'll find support for all of us from all of us. I just wanted to say also thank you for the EV charging stations. I just recently bought an electric vehicle, and I've used both the one over at the Health Human Services during a council meeting, and took my kids to the Boulder and used it over there. So, speaking of electric vehicles, as everybody has known that I have brought up EVs in the past, I assume that I know we have plans in the future in the plan to replace our fleet with electric vehicles. And I'm wondering if you could speak to the timeline of that, and also the infrastructure that needs to happen in order for that to happen. Electric vehicles have different maintenance requirements. They have different education requirements for the people who are doing those maintenances. Do we have, I guess the question of, have you looked into all the different aspects of what that's going to entail? And not just the cars and trucks, but also the lawnmowers and the weed whackers and all those kind of things that are, use a lot of pollution stuff.
Yeah, it's a great question. Thank you for asking. So I have to say that, our fleet services team is fantastic, and they have sunk their teeth into this issue for the past few months. They have partnered with some regional technical assistance providers that have helped with some data analysis in terms of costing, in terms of GHG reduction. And there's a preliminary draft 5-year plan for fleet replacement. And so they have a policy currently for what is the trigger for replacing cars in their fleet, whether it's mileage or repair costs, et cetera. And so they have built into that framework what is the trigger for EV. And some of it has to do with cost, and some of it has to do with availability. So they have costed all of that out, and have started incorporating some of that planning into their capital expenditure budget. So again, they're a fantastic team. I don't take credit for that plan, but it is certainly building upon the structure of the direction that we're trying to go. And in the long term, there are, of course, cost savings with EV fleets in terms of maintenance, not just gas. And so we are looking at ways, as Andrew mentioned, to support the installation of an EV charging infrastructure for our fleet, which is going to be, a lot of it is going to be over at the BMS facility. Is it 136? 126. Yeah, so so we're looking at grant funding, and to be honest, there's a whole lot of grant funding that's about to be released from the state, from the feds, and from other areas that we can look at for installation of different types of chargers for the public as well as for our fleet.
Thank you. On the subject of electrification, I know there's been some conversations happening among council members about moving towards for new builds, moving towards either prohibiting gas hookups or incentivizing against those. Is that something that you all talked about in this plan? And if so, is there going to be is staff going to be bringing forward a proposal to us on that regard?
So we've been making comments in concept review as they come to us for new projects. So obviously those projects don't currently have any teeth in the code, but developers are aware that that's one of our priorities. As Aaron was talking about, there's kind of an adoption curve that we need to kind of figure out the right timing for when that kind of implementation would make sense. It quite frankly doesn't make sense at this time for everybody to have heat pumps and fully electric heating. But I think that calculus is going to start changing probably in the mid to near term.
So you've seen some other municipalities around the state have started prohibiting gas hookups in new builds, only in new builds. What do you think the timeline would be the right time for us to look at that kind of policy?
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough discussion, and again, all this stuff is, right, because there are the trade-offs, right? And this is an example of a policy that would pass along costs to the public. And, you know, housing affordability is, I mean, I think the red lights are flashing on that, quite frankly. And we're looking at, you know, kind of a regulatory framework of 3 to 5 years of trying to put some teeth into this. So, you know, from our perspective, this is something that we need to time right, and the housing affordability issue is something that needs to get fixed like now.
Yeah, and the other thing that we can do is we can stair step in incentives, right? And so prepare the market and start looking at what are the best practices for communities that are looking at electric ready, right? So ensuring that builders are wiring houses so that they can be switched to electric later at a lower cost. And so that's something that could be incentivized rather than required in the interim as we build out our long-term policy adoption strategy. And something else that we are also looking at in terms of a longer time horizon is fuel switching. So if we look at existing buildings, changing them to electric, that's an extremely long time horizon. And as we've seen from Denver's plan, there is a high cost for that. However, we do have some ability to use data and some of our permitting data to look, and the age of homes, et cetera, to identify who are the homes and the homeowners where it might make sense to fuel switch now, where they could save money. And so we could identify those for the short term and then start looking at a longer term strategy that would include a broader regional contractor training effort with Boulder and other counties. So this is a multi-year process that a lot of communities are moving in that direction. We know we've had a lot of conversations with our other regional partners, but there's a lot of deliberation that needs to go into, a lot of stakeholder engagement, as well as funding. And so I neglected to introduce my colleague who's working on this issue right now and helping us with research. I have Garrett McDaniel here, and he's our newest staff member working on energy. So he's been attending a lot of the meetings and crunching some numbers. So he'll be focusing on our most pressing energy issues going forward with us.
Thank you.
I just want to chime in on that a little bit with an energy background. You know, in addition to the housing affordability issue that I think is very serious on this issue, I think when we're comparing to other municipalities who are taking these steps, it's important that we look at a lot of different factors. I'll use Berkeley, California as an example of sort of the leader on this. They have much lower heating load, right? There's much less heating that takes place in Berkeley, California than in Brookfield, Colorado. And so that load is much lower. They also have a slightly higher percentage of renewables already on their grid. If we were to electrify everything right now, it would temporarily increase our carbon emissions when we need to be reducing them. That will switch in the next X number of years. And I don't want to put a timeline on that. This is the topic of many spirited debates at ACES. We are constantly looking at this. People run numbers, people talk about new research and what other municipalities are doing. This is very much at the forefront of what we're discussing.
Okay. So on that topic, obviously I was talking about new builds. But that doesn't take into consideration all the existing homes out there. You know, my house, both my furnace and my hot water tanker gas is probably 5 years out before I have to replace them. I fully intend to replace them with heat pump or mini split systems when I get the chance, and probably solar also. But I have the resources to be able to do that, either out of pocket or, you know, an equity loan or something like that. You know, on the inclusion and equity aspect, how are we gonna help those that don't have the resources to do that? I was looking at one city that had a loan program where they would allow the homeowner or landlord to buy a heat pump, hot water tank, for example, and then pay it off through the utility bill. Are we at Brookfield, exploring those type of options either through our own utility or through connection with Excel possibly?
Yeah, great point. So on-bill financing is a successful model that's been used by other utilities. I don't know how far those discussions are with Excel. We've had discussions with some of our regional partners about that, and they have told us it's a very that's an uphill battle because there's just so many components. A lot of utilities don't want to become a banker, essentially. But I refer to Denver's model again. You know, clearly they have a sustainability fund, but what they are doing is they're prioritizing incentives and grants for low-income families. And so we have the opportunity to not only work with manufacturers and installers and the utility to access available incentives, but layer on additional grant funding. And so we can identify and target those residents and put a dollar value on that and go seek funding that wouldn't necessarily have to come out of our general fund. So that is something that a lot of people in a lot of funders and foundations are interested in terms of successful strategies to decarbonize homes for low-income families. We also have the option to work with multifamily property owners. So that's another way. If I'm a renter, I don't necessarily have the ability to change out my equipment, but I do have the burden of those bills. So through working with landlords, then we have the ability to identify other funding options to incentivize them to upgrade their equipment. And then, as I mentioned, not only layering on a contractor training program, but a public awareness campaign and using some of the data that we have already at our disposal within the city to really target residents, and as well as working with a lot of the community organizations, such as Brookfield Fish and some of the groups that are already providing services to these residents.
Thank you. The renter was actually my next question. The one final comment I have is, would it be possible, whatever incentive programs we end up having to help homeowners to retrofit, possibly also looking at the gray water retrofitting that the council passed last year as far as helping to conserve water also while we're at it?
I don't think it came out of that. I think something would be, is a gray water reuse system.
With those orders council passed last year, correct?
Yeah. We must have missed that one.
Okay.
I'll look at it. Thank you.
That's all I have, Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, we did, but we didn't have any plan to help people pay for it. We just allow it.
You can do it.
All right, Councilmember Cohen.
Thank you, obviously, for a very thorough report. It was very informative and aspirational. I know it's commented that support for sustainability depends often on the cost. When the costs go up, support goes down. So there's some very big challenges in that heating your home with gas is substantially cheaper than electricity. That's a huge hurdle to do that. And the cost of switching is obviously very high. I'm curious, since so much of sustainability in this community is dependent on others, that we need other actors to do their part for us to really achieve our goals. What is within our power, you think, are most of the top three things that we could actually do that is within our power? And I'm thinking the trash hauler proposal probably would make a significant difference. Obviously, if it doesn't pencil out to be cheaper for people, it's going to be a hard sell. Commuter community, it's with all due respect to Councilmember Ward, it's going to be very hard to get people out of their cars. But maybe we could increase bike usage if we actually had truly safe bike lanes. That stripe of paint isn't enough to get me on those roads yet. But if we had true barriers, things of that nature. Or is there potentially there's already a lot of government incentives for solar, such as energy efficiency changes, heat pumps, et cetera. There is enough awareness in this community that perhaps some just greater awareness, we might be able to achieve some growth if we put a lot of effort there.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, education and adoption is going to be part of any strategy, whatever it is proposed. We have to kind of prime the pump before you're ready to go with any action. And we've done a lot of that work, through the planning effort last year. Again, I think you touched on it, the kind of fixing our market failure in the waste removal is one of the big ones. The other big one from my perspective is land use. We have direct control over that. And that's probably the biggest lever you can get. Councilmember Lim has seen this graph that I've shown in some ACES meetings. Basically, there's a reverse asymptotic relationship between density and GHG, not just for GHG per capita, not just for transportation intensity, but all carbon intensity. It's a question of density. That's the biggest one.
Yeah, I think if we really want to focus on several key issues, we can follow the guidelines from one of our technical advisors, which is ICLEI USA, and ICLEI does climate advisory services around the world. They're a nonprofit that partners with us on our data analysis. And essentially they look at transportation focused communities, which we are, and they said essentially a transportation focused community such as yours will want to prioritize several things. First, energy efficiency. Secondly, EVs, and then in the long term, electrification. So we're not doing the long term right now, but we know we can do the first two. We've had extensive conversations with Xcel and United about the energy efficiency, and we know that the incentives that those utilities have are not being taken advantage of by the residents in Broomfield like they could. So right now we're having conversations with, we have a meeting set up next week with 14 community partners to see how we can help leverage their information channels to get the incentives out to folks. So this is a program that we can do right now, and we're already starting the ball rolling. Essentially, if utilities have a pot of money that they have to spend every year on incentives for their whole territory, and Broomfield gets a bunch of them, let's do it, right? We can take as much of those incentives as we need to in Broomfield to help our residents. And if we miss out, then we're not moving towards our goals. So that's one of the key things that we're focusing on right now that we can move forward. And then the other thing I'll say on EVs is that's moving very quickly. The industry is switching. Most of the major car manufacturers are pumping out EVs right now. They're switching their whole factories to ensure that now it's a little bit hard to find an EV. Pretty soon it's going to be hard to find an internal combustion engine. You're going to walk in and you're going to have a dealer who shows you the EV options, who knows what the incentives are, and the utility is going to help you connect your home charger. So that is one of the examples of a market force that's going to help us. But then we also have to amplify that message with education and additional incentives, and then working with multifamily properties so that we can really help the renters as well.
Just real quickly, you just heard you correctly. It's true. It's a true statement to say that Broomfield is underutilizing all the incentives that are out there for electrification or energy efficiency, et cetera.
Yes. Yes.
Compared to our surrounding communities or just this region in general.
I don't know as a percentage compared to other communities, but if we can get a greater percentage than other communities, then we should, right?
So perhaps a greater emphasis on public awareness and pushing that might be the most substantial thing we might see a positive effect.
Absolutely. And we're having great conversations right now with our communications team and HHS and various departments to strategize on ways to get that messaging out. We have we're developing a partnership with Excel's program Partners in Energy. It's done a deep dive on our data analysis, our data for community energy use, and so that plan is forthcoming.
Terrific, thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem Jaworski.
Thank you, Mayor. Start by, I do appreciate the comments I just heard from questions from Councilmember Cohen. That was one of the main questions I had was, what can we do? Because a lot of what was on there is reliant on other actors, whether it's, other governments, states, nation, worldwide, or other private actors. So that was helpful. And I do appreciate the presentation. I appreciate fully support all these goals and aspirations. The question I do have is, in light of a lot of the previous conversations we had, is the cost. These are great ideas. I know, Aaron, you're cognizant of this. I think we talked about that in the past. So, what can we afford? What can we do? And are we prioritizing those things that are the low hanging fruit, those things that we can't afford right now?
Yeah, I do also want to address something with the dependency on other actors before we get to the cost, and I appreciate that question as well. But you brought this up, Councilmember Cohen's brought this up. The biggest outside actor that is going to influence these are the utilities from which we procure power. And that is where we need to have the biggest influence, because any amount of electrification doesn't accomplish much of anything until the grid gets greener. So that is the single outside actor that has the biggest impact on all of this. And you see that in the chart. It's like 65% is grid decarbonization. And the things we can do there is we can encourage people who have the means to participate in Excel's Wind Source program, or in there are a variety of other programs through the utilities where you can procure RECs, which are renewable energy credits, which incentivize the utilities to produce more renewable energy, because they cannot use if they sell a resident or a company renewable energy credits, they cannot use them to meet their own goals. So that raises the quantity of renewable energy that needs to be produced by our utilities. So that's one of the big things. The other thing that I know Councilmember Henkel has been involved in with, I think CC4CA, is eventually pushing for joining a community choice aggregator. This is a long ways off, but the ability down the line, provided we are able to join what I would call a demonopolized market and procure our own energy. Those are the things we can do to push on the grid decarbonization sooner, and that will have the single biggest impact with regard to any outside actor. And that's really where I think that outside push needs to be asserted.
I could just add a little bit to that, Mayor Pro Tem. I think the way that we've kind of kicked off our sustainability initiatives is a little instructive. There have been kind of three main projects that we've pushed forward so far. One of them being energy performance contracting, the other being this green power purchase, and the other, trying to get curbside compost basically through our hauling system. And all of those will, we're negligibly cost burdensome, and EPC, as you heard, will even be cost, it'll be revenue neutral in the medium term and cost positive in the long term. So that is really where we are focusing our efforts right now, and that's kind of how we structured this out as kind of foundational, transformational, aspirational. And the hope is that these market forces and economics will change for some of these bigger reaches as we go forward. And then there may come a time where we as as staff are ready to propose something, big and costly. We're not there quite yet, maybe some kind of subsidy incentive type program that needs to be funded, something like that, but we're not there quite yet. But I mean, that is, our ROI is something that we look at on all of the policies and proposals that we put in there. And it's one of the biggest things we think of when we talked about putting these things together.
Thank you. No, I assume that we're all recognizing that, money plays a factor into these decisions. It would be great if we could do everything. I've said this before, but that's not the reality of the world that we live in, unfortunately. So the one thing I want to comment on, I've heard this in their first presentation, and hearing this again tonight, the second presentation, it's causing me a little bit of heartburn is all this, push for density and the blanket statements of no more single family homes. And I admire and appreciate the thought behind it, and the desire to protect our environment. And I think, as you mentioned, Mr. Bell, that's one way to decarbonize, I guess. But the concern I have is, forgetting who we are in Broomfield. We're not Denver. We're not Boulder. Today, and this sort of hit me. Today, I went out for lunch with my wife. We were in the Tennyson neighborhood in Denver. Also, I've been in the Highlands neighborhood a few times for meals over the last month or so, and I do appreciate the density there. I appreciate the walkability, but I talked about it with my wife a bit. And is that a place that I want to live? I don't think so. There's parking is very difficult. The streets are narrow. There are a lot of people, a lot of cars, even if it is walkable. And I think that's, there's probably 50, 60, 70,000 people that live in Broomfield that probably agree with me. But there's a reason we live here in Broomfield. I mean, any one of us can live in a Highlands neighborhood and get that density that would be great. But Broomfield is what we are. I urge my colleagues to remember that, or maybe the voters will at some point. But I mean, that's just I think there's a fine line there. There's there are things that we can do, and there are lots of steps that we can make. But I guess to summarize, my hopefully takeaway for everyone would be is we just need to be realistic and just understand we're Broomfield. We're not out some of these other areas, and we need to make those decisions accordingly. I feel better now. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Councilmember Lim.
Yes, one news item today on decarbonizing the grid was in the Denver Business Journal. So that was interesting that the PUC has successfully encouraged Xcel to think twice about their timetable for closing up the Comanche plant. So to that extent, if you feel so inclined to advocate to the PUC, tell them yay, push Xcel. We have considerations with in the state for just transition opportunities. So certainly, we need to consider those jobs with that plant also, but it's apparently has become a source of a lot of maintenance issues besides. So that's one way we could impact individually at decarbonizing the grid. I've had the opportunity over the 2 years to learn from the technical experts on ACES, and there have been many, and also to hear the passion of the advocates on ACES. So that's been historically how I would characterize the ACES group for the past 2 years. What
I was thinking of when Councilmember Cohen was speaking about getting the message out is reflected in the new ACES group to a large extent, in my perception. That the people that we just appointed to the new ACES group are message people. They are communicators. They are really charged up about taking, the message out to the community and educating people and things like that in various ways. So I just wanted to share, that's my first impression of the new ACES group. And to that degree, then Councilmember Cohen will be thrilled that we have those people in place. At the Broomfield Chamber annual breakfast last week, I was struck by our economic vitality director pointing out the connection between bringing industry and commercial into Broomfield as related to sustainability. So he was pointing out that many companies that are choosing to come into Broomfield are choosing to do so because of our sustainable values, our amenities that are open space, and just they see Broomfield as a progressive community on various sustainability issues and a concern with climate change that's present. So that struck me when I was sitting at the chamber breakfast, that there is that connection where we just talked about previously that we need to emphasize commercial development. Well, maybe that is connected to our sustainability progress also. Could staff, I guess there was a question from a resident about what the nature of the transportation demand management program would be. So that's a little further out, but if you could address that question that was from a resident, there was some concern there.
Yeah, thank you, Councilmember Lynn, for those comments. And just to maybe follow up on your first comment, that hopefully doesn't give the mayor pro tem too much heartburn. Mixed use is another approach and strategy. And that plays into a transportation demand management scheme. Really what we're trying to do is reduce commuter trips, because that's reliably the most impactful thing from a vehicle miles traveled perspective, right? So a plan would look something like that for Broomfield businesses. And, I think Broomfield government's already doing a really good job with the way we leaned into the hybrid work thing with COVID. And not only that, I think, does it give more workplace satisfaction, but it keeps all those cars off the road during rush hour. And so it would be something like that, working with commuter solutions and employers to try and figure out how do you take that peak off of the rush hour curves and spread out commuter habits over time and space. Those are the kind of broad strokes of what that would look like.
Oh, okay. Any other council
Can I add a
members?
comment?
Sure.
And when we've talked about this with this TDM with the transportation program, the transportation staff, essentially we focused it around incentives. So how can we incentivize this behavior with carrots rather than with sticks? And then your other comment, Councilmember Lim, about the business community here in Broomfield, I think it's an important one. And through our, I just wanted to update the council, through our planning process over the past year, we've had great conversations with some of our key business partners in Broomfield about some of their sustainability practices. So you may or may not know that organizations like Vail and Oracle and Crocs and Hunter Douglas and Macerich, they're really committed to sustainability. So we've had conversations with all of those large actors and heard about their sustainability plans And they want to work with us and they want to be our advocates in the community. And they also want to be mentors for smaller businesses that don't have the resources or the expertise to advance their own sustainability goals. So we are going to continue to work with the Economic Vitality team to see how we can support businesses moving forward in their sustainability plans. We focused a lot on residents this evening, but we also have a commercial component where we want to work hand in hand with the Chamber of Commerce and other business partners to ensure that that we identify overlapping priorities, ideally money-saving priorities that would help businesses become more energy efficient, install solar panels or EV chargers, and develop transportation demand programs.
Thank you very much, and on having had the privilege to work with the ACES team for the past 2 years, I'd like to thank every one of them many of whom are probably listening if they're not here. Thank you.
Councilmember Henkel. Thank you, Mayor. Thank you all for being here tonight. This is exciting, and I'm sure, Mr. Valdez, you're more excited about this than all these harder questions I think we'll guests. Sometimes we tend to hit a dead end, so this gives us hope. And it does, provide a more clear path for direction that council wants to take. And you all know that a lot of us are really on board with what you have proposed and what's sort of here in the pathway that we've taken. I love the way that we have all these different stakeholders. I was reading all of how many people and what institutions were involved in this. And I was really impressed with it. I really am intrigued by this ClearPath software and that sort of platform and this Masters of the Environment. Can anyone talk about those graduate level students and how do I get in touch with them and see how cool that software is?
Yeah, that's great. So I come from the nonprofit sector, so I'm used to leveraging very few resources. So I was able to identify a lot of technical assistance that we brought to the table. And essentially, one of them was, as you mentioned, the ICLEI ClearPath software. So that's through our partnership with the ICLEI Technical Assistance Providers. And I don't actually know what that stands for. It's something like local government something. So the ClearPath software is something that is essentially an online software platform that not only collects not only does an inventory for us, but does projections. So essentially it's like, if you tweak this button, then your path will go this way, or if you tweak this button, your path will go this way. So a lot of that that software that we now have access to, we can continue to tweak as our priorities change, or if we decide we want to go in this direction, or if council would like to see us focus on one area or another. And so with the CU Boulder graduate students, that was another program that we accessed. Essentially, we had about 9 months of free interns, and there were 4 of them. And so we had about 10 hours a week of each of them, and they each focused on a different area of research. And so through that program, they were supervised by a graduate advisor. And they came into our office at HHS and we worked with them, and they attended ACES meetings and crunched a lot of numbers for us in their ClearPath software. So we got a lot of that work done, and it was over the course of 2021.
Thank you. As a math person, maybe kind of cool to see that. And I am on board with this whole, really putting the pressure on our big wigs, right, with our energy sources. So demonopolizing it would be wonderful, and putting that added pressure. I write letters all the time, and then try to gather other people to do the same, because I think that added pressure will really make a difference. So thank you all again. All right.
Can I just address one thing on demonopolization that Councilmember Henkel mentioned and Councilmember Lim referenced, the potential early retirement of Comanche. Those two things can go hand in hand together. I mean, this is the stuff I deal with for a living, so you're getting me in an area that I like to talk, but I'll keep it brief. When you demonopolize the grid, you add a lot of transparency to those decisions. So if a plant like Comanche is running at a loss or operating at a loss, that becomes a little more transparent and it makes it easier to make those decisions. So those two topics do go hand in hand when we talk about leveraging and leaning on, you know, the entities from which we procure power.
Thank you, Councilmember Anderson.
Thank you. I will keep this very short. I just want to make a quick comment about the multimodal transportation that those of us north of 144th are really excited about opportunities to come. And I know specifically residents of Anthem Ranch, this is if there was a bus, they would ride it. So I mean, that is it can kind of depends on which area we're targeting, so that outreach and understand the needs of the community, that we could see a significant, if done right, and meeting needs of the community, it could be significant on the north side. So I just have one question, and actually we just lost our time from the Beacon Street. So I was just wondering if we could get a quick update if there's anything higher level on the energy performance contract. Waited too long. Is there like, or I know there's a report coming eventually, but is there any like is there something, are we seeing significant areas, any high level?
Yeah, so it's a great question. I'm sorry, our Beacon Street representative had to drive back to Golden. So she had to leave. So, but Andrew and I have been involved in the project from the beginning. And essentially the process that we've had so far has been iterative in that we've been meeting regularly with our facilities team as well as department heads of the related facilities. And so through that process, Beacon Street has presented us essentially a proposed work scope. And so we're in that work scope, there are proposed energy efficiency upgrades, equipment changes, renewables, charging stations, dashboard for energy monitoring. And so a lot of that right now, we're having discussions with the facilities team on what do we actually need in the work scope. There's a lot of discussion about the fact that we already are doing a lot of things that they proposed and that we can manage that in-house. So we're identifying what is the best path forward so that we can get to a final work scope that would be present the best cost savings for us. So we don't have that complete update for you yet. So those are ongoing discussions.
That is very helpful. Thank you. That's all my questions.
Good evening, Councilmember Shah.
Thank you, Mayor. I really appreciate the work of staff on this as well as the ACES committee. You know, there's a huge amount of time that goes into this and a lot of expertise I'm in those rooms. I'm not in those rooms anymore, but I knew that there was a lot of expertise, and it sounds like there continues to be a lot of expertise in those rooms. So thank you for having these conversations. You know, what I'm always reminded of is that sustainability is a top priority of our community. This has been communicated over the years, and I believe that, you know, our community continues to ask us to create a more sustainable Broomfield. And I don't believe that we have to change or alter our secret sauce of what makes us Broomfield in order to create that more sustainable Broomfield. And I think, in fact, as we create a more sustainable Broomfield, we will better realize what that secret sauce is and better realize that community that we all long for here in Broomfield. So I look forward to, you know, this continued work to see what that looks like, because it is exciting. One of the things that was in this memo, and it didn't really dive into this, and yet there's a lot of conversations happening around environmental injustice. And this is one in which I had to look it up because I couldn't remember which legislative session, but it was this previous legislative session where they actually created a task force to define what environmental injustice is for the state of Colorado. So I'm curious if you all can help kind of unveil those current conversations in terms of how do we define environmental justice and provide some examples of what environmental injustice looks like. Perhaps one of those is Suncor, which is a very current conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. Many of you know that I spent a lot of my career in New Orleans, and so there's a lot of environmental justice issues there that I got into very deeply in terms of working with community organizations on issues like pollution. So we know, for example, that in the United States and in fact in communities across the world, low-income families and families of color are more likely to live in next to sites of industrial plants and machinery. So that, of course, means more pollution directly in their neighborhood. So that's one example. Those are often the cheapest places to live, right? And people that want to live in nice houses don't always want to live there, right? And so that's just one example, but one of the things that we see in Broomfield and we see often in many communities is another issue called energy burden. So if, for example, if you make $17,000 a year and I make $70,000 a year, but we both live in a 1,000 square foot house, our energy bill is probably the same, but it's a much higher proportion of your income. In addition, you are more likely to live in an older house with less insulation. So your energy bill is probably even higher. So you're then paying a very high percentage of your monthly income towards energy compared to me. So that's an example of what it means at the household level, at the kitchen table finance level for environmental justice. So those are funds that they wouldn't be able to spend on other things like school or clothes or education for and medicine for their families. So those are the types of things that we look at. And I will say that in Broomfield, these are often hidden issues. And we really want to focus on working with our community partners to identify who are the disproportionately impacted families, who are the underserved families, who are the families who, for example, may need translation services in order to understand how to access these programs, and really leveraging some of the organizations that are already on the ground, providing services like a Precious Child or Broomfield Fish that we can support and empower to become messengers for these programs that in ways that provide services to benefit their clients.
Thank you so much for that. That's all I have, ma'am.
Thank you. Before we go to round two, just remind everybody we have an executive session following this, which will also be probably intense. So I just had one quick question. It was also from a member of the community. It states in the DEI section that more affluent communities generate more emissions and trash than poorer communities. How is that exactly determined?
Yes, thank you for the question. I read the question, but I don't remember. I couldn't find the citation, so I don't know where it came from in the report. However, we do know, for example, that that people of greater means emit more emissions. So, for example, people often have larger homes if they have more money, and they may have more cars or more homes, and they probably order a lot more packages on Amazon, do a lot more shopping and purchasing things. So there are a lot more emissions generated, often from people of means, and often the burden of, as I mentioned to Councilmember Schaaf, dealing with the environmental fallout of that falls on, not disproportionately on, underserved communities.
Thank you. Code enforcement. So in one other question about the code compliance part, we're not looking to force people to retrofit their homes or anything like that, right? This would be completely voluntary if people wanted to do that.
Right, at the moment, there are a lot of incentives and there's funding available on the table right now that people can access to weatherize or provide energy efficiency upgrades for their homes. So we fully intend to work with the newly formed housing authority as well as our housing department in-house and our community partners to ensure that that those funds are accessible to the community. We do not have plans right now to force people to do any of that. We really want to ensure that we provide a pathway to incentivize that.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Ms. Pollock. We'll go to Councilmember Ward.
Thank you, Mayor. One question that I just thought of is, what percentage of renewable energy makes up Xcel Energy's its distribution to residents? And the same question would go for United Power.
For Xcel Energy's Public Service of Colorado subsidiary, I believe it's 30% currently. For United Power, it's, I believe, between, you know what, I don't want to answer because I'm not 100% sure. I'm sure it is lower than 30% though.
Okay, thank you. I was trying to find it online and they do not make it very easy like Xcel Energy does to find that information. So that's my only other question I had. The only other comment I want to make is regards to my colleague, Mayor Pro Tem Jersey, with regard to single-family homes. Just because Broomfield has built itself this way and every other suburb since 1950 does not get this right, nor should we continue to do so. And it is not the house that makes up the character of the town, it is the residents that we bring into this town that make up that character and make it special.
Thank you. Councilmember Marshall.
Thank you, Mayor. I just have two quick questions. So a resident messaged me while we were talking and had a question about the gas hookups and for the new build specifically. And his question was, you know, for every new build, every new gas hookup, you've got at least 50 years of natural gas flowing into our community. So with our development update of our code that we're planning on doing anyway, is it possible to phase a gas hookup ordinance where it says, you know, for the next 3 years, for example, we're going to incentivize you not to have gas hookups, but then after 3 years, it'll be prohibited?
Yeah, I think that was sort of what I was alluding to before, that, you know, we want to have a multi-step pathway where it is not so prohibitive at the beginning, and that we really create we create an on-ramp both for residents as well as for developers. And we want to ensure that we have, for example, electric ready, and we have electric incentivized before we have electric required.
Okay. For my part, I would support doing that sooner than later. If we are going to develop update codes for other development issues, that would be something I would support. The other question, the other kind of comment and question, not a question, is on the previous comment about mandating retrofitting. Is it possible to, I mean, I know it's possible, but what is your opinion on, you know, some countries are now prohibiting the, you know, the sale of combustion engines after a certain point. So would it be possible, say, you know, incentivize whatever for the next 10 years, but then after 10 years, no longer any hot water tank or HVAC system that's sold in the city of Broomfield has to be electric? Not mandating retrofitting, but, you know, not giving you that option, I guess.
You're talking about replacement?
Yeah.
So again, this is another issue where the market forces could overtake this problem and help us solve it to a large degree. So we know that there is a huge push, not only in some large municipalities to go this direction. You know, Andrew mentioned Oakland, but then we also have New York City and some other places that are really, and in Denver, are really moving in this direction. And so that requires a huge shift in not only the workforce, but in manufacturing. So there are market forces that will continue to build upon that, such that the prices will likely go down. And in the interim, the incentives will definitely go up. I know that there's a large federal push for this. And so here's an opportunity again where we have to strategize what is our long-term phase-in approach, where we start with incentivization before requirements.
Thank you, Mayor.
All right, thank you. Any other second round comments? We're ready to wrap it up. Well, thank you so much, Ms. Paula, Mr. Valdez, Mr. Jones, and Mr. Mouch, and the entire ACES team for all your work. I want to remind people that the views expressed by individual council members and do not reflect the consensus of the body. That concludes the agenda items for this evening's study session. There being no further business, the study session is adjourned.